Welcome back to the Comic Book Historians Podcast. I'm Alex Grant. Today we have very special guest, Jim Shooter. We did a very long interview with the man that was 8 hours, career spanning. And believe it or not, there's missing pieces. Jim was involved in a lot of decisions on a day-to-day basis. Even a week of his life during Marvel Editor-in-Chief could fill many hours of a podcast. Jim, thanks so much for joining us today for this companion interview.
Oh, thank you. My pleasure.
So what I wanted to do is kind of do a parallel timeline. You know, we did a timeline last time. Today, we're going to kind of focus a little more on the licensing deals that you made all the time back then. But I also want to talk a little bit about before and some after. So last time we mentioned Stan Lee. You've worked with Stan Lee. Tell us, like, what other stories that you may have had with him that you thought, you know, this guy was in charge of Marvel and was responsible for the line it took in the 60s.
Well, the first time I met him and we talked about comics, you could tell this guy, you know, was more than knew what he was talking about. He was a genius. I mean, and I worked closely with him. I worked with him for 2 years or so on the SpiderMan newspaper strip. And just, you know, every conversation you had, he was full of ideas. He had a command of the form. And, you know, okay, so because you say I worked with Jack Kirby too. For 2.5 years, Jack Kirby was doing 4 comic books a month, pencil and writing. And I was editing them. So I get these stories from Jack, and, you know, Jack's a genius. Nobody has to pad Jack's resume. He's the greatest creator this business ever saw. But he also wasn't like Stan. He didn't have the vision, the organizational skills, the foundation. And so I worked with Jack, and it was fine. And the thing is, I'd be on the phone with him hours every week because he would send in a completed comic book, penciled and scripted, every week. He'd take it out of the envelope, and the whole room would smell like cigar smoke, you know, because he smoked when he was drawing.
Yeah.
Well, you know, I mean, the thing is, when I get done going over it, I'd say, Jack, is it okay if I take out some of these exclamation points? Because he put 10 exclamation points after every sentence. And he said, oh, you do that, young man, you know. And sometimes, you know, he'd make little mistakes here and there, and I'd help him fix them. I'd say, you know, look, you kind of did this scene twice, you know, but if we do it, if I change the dialogue a little bit, it'll look like it's like on purpose, you know, and it'll look, you know, it'll be good. Oh, you do that, young man, you know. And so, you know, I'd work with him, but then, you know, those kind of mistakes was probably because he was getting older, you know. And I remember the first year I was there, he had to, they wouldn't let him drive anymore because he crashed into a tree because he forgot he was driving. And also he had trouble finding his way home. So, I mean, you know, he had some loss of memory. So a few things went wrong. But still, at the end of these conversations I had with him, if he had time, I'd start asking him questions. Jack, how did you come up with this? Why did you do it this way? You know, why did you choose this angle? What were you thinking?
You mean as far as like current work he was turning in at the time?
Yeah, and he would, when he was talking comics, he was sharp as a tack. I mean, when he was talking shop, the guy was right back there, and he knew exactly what he did and why he did it, and he would tell you. And I learned a lot from him. He was tremendous. But having worked with him for 2.5 years, I can tell you that he didn't invent the Marvel Universe, and he probably, you know, did a lot with each character, but he didn't, it wasn't all him. It was Stan.
So then when you were looking over at Jack's art, was that like in that, this was even before you were editor-in-chief, like when you were there from 76 to 78 as an associate editor, you were looking at his stuff, at Kirby's stuff, while you were also working with Stan on the Spider-Man newspaper strip, right?
Absolutely. And the thing is, see, Kirby had a 3-year contract with Marvel. He was 6 months into it when I came in as editor, all right? And in those 6 months, Jack was technically his own editor, okay? And so the other people who worked there were glad to just let the stuff go the way it was. And so if you look at those first 6 months of Jack's work, some of it was pretty chaotic, okay, and lots of exclamation points. When I came in, I said, this stuff is great and it deserves some attention. And so I started calling him, going over it with him. And that would have been from, his contract ran from the middle of 75 through the middle of 78. And I was there from the beginning of 76 till 10 years.
Yeah.
No, 12 years, actually.
Yeah, 12 years.
Yeah. So at any rate, I mean, I was working with him, and I was talking to Stan, and like I said, I talked to everybody. I wanted to know what was going on.
A quick question about Stan. When you worked with him on the Spider-Man newspaper strip, I remember you were saying that you would basically provide plots, go through it with him. When you would provide plots, how would he then say, I love that idea, then let's do this with it? How did that conversation go exactly?
Well,
would it go?
Generally speaking, I knew what I was doing, and generally speaking, it was me doing it.
Right.
We'd talk about what we might do next, like what the next stories. I think ran 16 weeks. I can't remember. I think, but so we talk about what the next upcoming story might be, and kick ideas around and stuff like that. I generally just wrote when it came down to writing the plots and breaking it down panel by panel. That was me.
Yeah. And that didn't in any way make you think that he's less creative in any sense. Not at all. It was more because he had so much experience with it that he enjoyed fresh ideas from you. Is that how? And did you feel like it was almost like a mentor kind of, like a mentor relationship with you and him?
Yeah, I mean, but the thing is, at that point in his life, he didn't want to do all that work.
Yeah,
he wanted somebody else to do it, and he tried Len Wein, and Len didn't work out. Len couldn't do it. Okay, maybe he just wasn't familiar with strip technique or something. But and then he asked a lot of other people, and everybody turned him down because they were afraid of being embarrassed if he fired Len from the strip, not the company. No one else wanted to take that chance. And finally it got to me, and I said, yeah, I'll do it. Yeah. And he didn't really know much about me at that point. And when I turned in the first plot, he's reading it. He says, this is good.
Yeah.
And I said, yeah, I know. He says, why is it good?
Were these in-person sessions generally?
Oh, sure. Yeah. His office was all of 30 feet from where I sat.
Okay.
So I'd go in there and we'd talk. And, like the thing is like he was happy that he had someone who didn't have to explain everything to.
Right.
When we talked, it was the idea phase. It was, freewheeling and then stuff. And then he contributed brilliantly. He just didn't want to grind it out.
Mm-hmm.
He wanted a grinder, and that was me. So, and the thing is, I was pretty good at it. I mean, He liked what I did. He liked my instincts. As a matter of fact, after the first couple of weeks of doing like descriptions of each panel with the, telling him what the story was. Oh, P.S. One time I wrote some suggested dialogue. He almost killed me.
I see. He was very protective over his dialogue. Yeah.
In my head, and I can't, he said, I don't want anybody else doing, the writing of the script. He was very fussy about that. He didn't want credit for anyone else's work. The reason they didn't put my name as plotter on the strip is because the syndicate wouldn't do it.
Yeah. Okay.
All right. They said, he's an assistant. Screw him.
I gotcha. And that's how syndicates are. Yeah.
Yeah. And so anyway, he was, and if I was doing something and he made comments, they were wise comments. He knew what he was talking about.
Yeah.
The guy was brilliant, and people should not take away from him what he really did. He did amazing,
wonderful taste, and he wasn't afraid to push the line toward a direction. But now, what did you think of? And how did it come about? The Stan Lee, Jack Kirby Silver Surfer graphic novel from 1978, and what did you think of it?
Well, he was on staff, or not on staff. He was under contract to Marvel. He was already working for Marvel. I think Stan proposed that, and Jack agreed. Made a good contract. He got very well paid, I thought it was fine. I think, in a way, it was, I don't know. It wasn't that fresh, brilliant stuff they were doing in the 60s. It was kind of a little tour down memory lane, I guess, but I thought it was fun. And I loved what Jack did. When I was working on this stuff, even when he would make little slip-ups and stuff, the fact is, the guy was great. The thought that went in there, all the creative stuff, reading the Eternals and thinking, how does this guy keep doing this?
Was that going to be a movie?
Not that I know of.
The Silver Surfer graphic novel? No?
Not that I know of.
Okay. And then what did you think of Eternals when it came out?
Well, I edited it, so I thought it was good. I remember one time Archie Goodwin, who was wise and smarter than me and really knew his stuff. One time when he was editor-in-chief and I was still editor, we were sitting in Stan's office and a Kirby book had just come in, and it was an Eternals book. And so I brought it in, we're kind of looking at it, smelling the cigar smoke. And Archie didn't like the title. The title of the story was Gods and Men at City College. And Archie said, I don't like this title. And Stan said, what do you think, Jim? I said, I'm sorry, Archie, I love it. And he said, I do too, Arch. What's wrong with it? He said, well, it's almost humorous. But we went with the title. Yeah. And Archie, you can't take anything away from Archie. Archie was God. He was tremendous. I learned so much from him. He was great. Anyway, but it's like Jack always had these clever ways of looking at things and new ways, and he'd grab you with his ideas. And
yeah,
did
you read New Gods also when that was coming out?
I read a couple issues here and there.
I got you. You weren't that into it. Okay.
No.
Tell me about working with Sol Brodsky. You wrote his obituary when he died in 1984.
Got a letter from Stan thanking me for that. He said it was great. I was pleased. The thing with Sol is that in the 60s, it was just Stan and Sol and some people who turned the cranks. And Sol was indispensable. Stan wanted to do the creative. He was in charge. He wanted to write. He wrote everything. Okay. One time I asked him, how did you write 12 books a month for 10 years? I wrote 6 one month and almost killed me. This is Stan. He always said nice things. He was always good with it. He said, he said to me, he said, you put more into it than I do. I said, no, I don't. Because he revolutionized the whole field. Anyway, the thing is, it was just him and Sol. And so Stan would let Sol do anything he didn't want to do. If it was legal, technical, financial, or complicated, that's Sol. And Sol did it brilliantly. And Marvel took off. And he has a big part of that. He was a tremendous part of that. Okay. What people don't know is that eventually Stan was kind of that they weren't doing that anymore. Stan was sort of doing, he got to be president of the company for a while. Sol was essentially then just the production manager, and he didn't like that. And he got together with this other guy, and they decided that he was going to leave Marvel, and they would start their own comic book company. It was called Skywald, SKY from Brodsky and
right. That's where the Hellrider comics came from.
And that didn't work out. That failed. Okay, comics in general were going downhill at that point. Okay, so now Sol needed a job, right? So he goes to his old friend Stan, and the trouble is they had a new production manager. There was really no place for Sol. Stan lobbied and he convinced the president, who convinced the board that we needed, the Marvel needed, I wasn't there yet, Marvel needed an operations vice president to run the operations, right? And so Sol came in and was hired as a vice president. And the thing is, he really didn't have anything to do because, he wasn't running editorial, and the production manager was running production. So literally, Sol was doing things like making sure the doors had locks and changing light bulbs. I kid you not. All right. it was a phony job that Stan made up so his friend would have money and to keep him alive. And I'll tell you what, he earned that in the 60s. I mean, he earned that. Okay, so what else did Sol do? Well, he was kind of Stan's assistant. You know, if Stan needed a presentation board for some pitch in Hollywood, Sol would get it done. If Stan, needed anything, I mean, Sol was there to do it for him. Okay, so now, before me, the editors-in-chief before me, none of them had much of a business background. Roy, brilliant guy, could do anything you wanted, but at that time, Stan was still there, and he didn't have the power that I had. Len and Marv, they just wanted to do the comics. They wanted to be like the head writers, and that's it. Even Archie and Jerry weren't really into. They didn't want to deal with legal, technical, financial, or complicated. So in the vacuum of authority, Sol started doing that stuff. Okay, so what would happen is the editor-in-chief, some legal issue would come up. He'd go to Sol. Sol would call the lawyer. So when I came in, I saw this going on. And when I came in, I said, I can call the lawyer. Why do I need Sol? So Barry Kaplan, when I took the job, he was the vice president of finance.
And you're talking about when you took the job as editor-in-chief in 78 now?
1978. Yeah, and so at any rate, Barry sat me down. He said, let me go over the organization with you. I said, okay. And there was the president of the company, me, and then all the editorial and production people under me. Okay? Sol wasn't even on the chart. Neither was Stan. And I said, oh, okay. So all these people report to me. He said, yeah, okay, fine. So I wasn't going to Sol to ask for legal or technical or financial help. If something financial came up, I called Barry. If something legal came up, I called Alice Donnerfeld. If I needed help, I knew who to go to. Sol, therefore, didn't really have a lot to do. And after a little while, the president of the company, Jim Galton, he calls me upstairs to his office and he sits me down. He says, what does Sol do? And I said, well, he's kind of Stan's assistant, And Stan, of course, was doing all the TV, movie, animation stuff. He wasn't involved with the comics. And so Galton, he said, is there anything that Sol could do? Can you give him something? And I said, yeah. I said, I'll tell you what, I got my hands full with the comics. I said, he could do the Hostess Twinkie ads and handle the strips and any, presentation stuff that Stan wants. And I said, if he could take all that kind of, a lot of work, but, not off to the side from the comics. I said, if he could take that, that'd be great. And so, I knew Sol could handle it. I mean, God, he was, terrific. So
is that special projects? Is that what that is?
Yeah, that's a, garbage can term for that. He was allegedly the vice president of operations, but I gave him all that stuff. I gave him my office too. I was at a smaller office when I was associate editor. It was it was in the editorial suite and it was close to the production department. And the editor-in-chief had a bigger office down the hall, and Sol had this smaller office off to the side. And I just didn't have time to move. I said, I like it here. And so I told Sol, I said, why don't you take this office? And he did. He was happy. It's got a nice, dignified office with, lots of room and everything. So anyway, the point is, I sort of made up a job for him. And it was great that he was doing that because it just saved my life, And then when Sol passed away, we didn't replace him. The stuff just came back to me. It was, it just, he, I guess, technically reported to me, but he was a vice president. There was nothing I was going to tell him that was useful. So I left him alone. He was, always happy to see me. It was good.
And so it sounds like his coming back really was about Stan being loyal to his friend and make sure he had something. And then you also then made sure he had something. Do you know if when he left for Skywald, I think in 72-ish or something, or maybe 70, do you think, was Stan upset about that?
I don't think so. I think that, I mean, we never had a long talk about it or anything like that, but Stan, he loved Sol.
Yeah.
You know, I'm telling you, if he had a made-up job at Marvel when he needed one, he earned it.
Yeah.
He built that place, you know, and so, you know, it's like the fact that he was, you know, there doing kind of junk work for a while, I don't care. I mean, you know, he earned it and deserved it.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I, you know, I was happy that he was there to help me.
Yeah.
Take some of the stuff off of my hands.
Yeah. And, I think there were 3 people, right? Like Kirby, Sol Brodsky, and then Larry Lieber was at Atlas for a little bit, and they all kind of came back around the same time when you started, it seemed.
Just before me was Kirby. Larry Lieber was always around. I saw him all the time. I don't know what he was doing for us. He eventually succeeded me plotting the strip.
That's right.
You know, eventually.
Yeah. And he even drew for it a little bit too. Yeah.
Drew it for a while. And it was pretty good too. And he did it the same way I did. He did little layouts for Stan, so that Stan could write the dialogue from the layouts and then give it all to the artist at once, dialogue and everything. So anyway, Larry was there. I can't remember who else. Just Kirby and Sol. Yes, and so Sol was already there when I came in. Kirby was. Larry was always around.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so Larry was always around, even during his Atlas period. He was still just around anyway, probably.
Well, yeah, I would see him once in a while. I actually went over to see him once at Atlas. He was, I guess, the editor-in-chief there. I guess he replaced Jeff Robin.
Right, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah. And
you went over there?
Yeah. Well, first of all, you know, I was associate editor at Marvel, and they had promised me freelance work, and none came. And I wasn't making all that much money, and I could have used some freelance work. And so then everybody starts talking about this new company, Atlas, and they're paying such high rates and everything. So somebody was going over there, and they said, "Why don't you come with me?" And I said, "All right." So I went over. Do
you think you could have possibly been at DC while that was happening?
Was I at DC?
Yeah, while the Atlas thing was happening, or you were at?
No, I was at Marvel.
Because I thought that was 74, 75-ish, or maybe, yeah, okay.
I think it was maybe 75, 76.
Okay.
But it was, you know, I met Jeff Robin because we were both giving depositions in some legal case.
I see.
Then I knew he was replaced by Larry Lieber.
Yeah.
I was in New York working for Marvel when that happened. And I went to see Larry, and he was trying to out Marvel, you know.
Yeah, that's right.
You know, I don't know, more extreme.
Uh-huh.
And you know, so I talked about maybe doing something for them, but I never did. And I probably couldn't anyway, because if you worked on staff at Marvel, they didn't want you working across the street.
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. Did you ever meet Martin Goodman ever?
I think I sort of, you know, passed by him in the hall a couple times. I mean, I think that, I guess technically I probably met him once, you know, was introduced. But I never had anything to do with him.
And then Chip Goodman?
Again, I
kind of same.
Usually saw him at a distance, but I knew who he was, and he was around once in a while.
So now I have one question that I got from a friend of mine that 1978, there was a copyright law that went into effect as you were becoming editor-in-chief. And this then made you responsible for having freelancers sign all this work for hire stuff. And this is right when you're starting. And this is something that Archie Goodman didn't really have to deal with. And that probably he then goes off to the creator-owned Epic line. He's probably not wanting to even deal with that stuff. How did that affect you as editor-in-chief and your relationships with artists at the time?
Well, it didn't help. I mean, the thing is, it's the copyright law of 1976, which took effect on the first day of January 1978. They gave you 2 years to tool up. Okay, so first working day of January 1978, maybe the January 2nd, I don't know, whatever it was, I come to work, sit at my desk, I'm the editor-in-chief. About 15 minutes later, the phone rings, and it's the company counsel. It's Alice Donnerfeld. And she introduced herself, the company counsel. What have you done about the copyright law of 1976? I said, lady, I've been here 15 minutes. And so anyway, I went up and had meetings with her and found out about the copyright law of 1976. And that one of the provisions of that was the things that used to be sort of taken for granted that they were work for hire, collective works, like things like encyclopedias, whatever, and anything done under the direction of an editor, stuff like that. There were all these tests, that made it work for hire. Well, the new law said it's only work for hire if the person signs an agreement that it is a work for hire. And it better be a damn good agreement if it's retroactive, because the agreement is supposed to be signed first. And so we had outside counsel, and they drew up this work for hire document. It's like 4 pages long. It's all legalese, whereas, now, therefore. Oh, come on. And so they give it to me, and I tried to explain to some people, we need to do this, there's nothing I can do about it. And nobody wanted to sign it. Nobody wants to sign any legal document, and certainly not, one that's scary. So the day after I handed out a few of these things, and nobody would sign it, the next day I come into work, and all over the lobby of the building, all over the elevators, all over the foyer outside Marvel's offices, it's wallpapered with the first page of that agreement, and printed in red across it. It was, printed. It wasn't, nobody did this by hand. Was, sign this document and you're signing your life away. And then it said a little thing down, join the Comic Book Creators Guild. My good friend, Neal Adams, always my good friend, even through that period. He was organizing a guild because he realized that Marvel was vulnerable. And he thought that DC was all buttoned up. They had all their stuff. They had the work for hire built into the voucher. It was all done perfectly on time because they were very buttoned up. Marvel was a train wreck. So anyway, here's my best friend starting this guild, and I'm just trying to get going here. I have so many problems. Everything's late. There's corruption and there's theft going on. There's all kinds of terrible stuff, and the book sucked. And it was, I was like, what? Now I got this to deal with? So I'm trying to get people to sign this thing, and no one wanted to do it. So the contract guys, all the contract guys, they already had that language in their contract. So sort of as a show to the other people, I asked John Buscema, Gene Colan, other people, Marv, I think, sign this. You've already signed it, but sign it again. So I had some that I could say, look, these other guys, they understand this doesn't change anything. It doesn't change anything. It's the same deal. So a few guys like Bill Mantlo, who would really wanted, he'd do anything to get work. He was kind of just one little aside. He was, when there was all just page rate, Bill was the guy who would stay up all night and finish something, and he'd turn it in. And he actually liked that, because if there were words on paper, nobody's going to turn them down, right? Because they needed it. And he exploited that. And he was doing some pretty crummy hack work. And he also plagiarized things.
Oh, okay, I didn't know that.
And so the day I sat down in that chair, sometime that morning, Bill comes to my door. And I told him a lot of times, you can't do this. And I said, you have to fix this. And he would say, no, because I didn't have the authority to fire him when I was just the editor. He'd say, fix it yourself. I already got paid, the hell with you. So he comes in that morning, comes into my door, and he stands there. He says, well, I assume I'm fired. I said, no, Bill, this is day one. And it was for everybody. I said, day one, okay? Do your job. That's all I need. Do your job, And he started, and he did some great stuff. Micronauts were on. He screwed up a couple times, but basically he took the chance and was glad to have it. And I can't tell you, we'd have arguments sometimes. And the next day he come in and say, "Oh, I'm sorry, I got carried away." I said, it's okay. People yell at me all the time. I'm used to it. But all right, now back to the work for hire thing.
Yeah. And this was after Marvel, before they were doing that thing on the check, right? That people would have to sign.
Yeah, everybody did that. It was that. I don't know what that actually accomplished, but
Right.
yeah, there was a stamp on the back of the check that you acknowledged that you had done this work for hire. Number one, the copyright law said it had to be in advance, not when you get the check.
I see.
Number two, and you have to have a good document if that's not true. Number two, stamping the back of somebody's paycheck would not stand in court.
Right. I see.
I know enough about that would never happen in court. Okay, so here's Neal starting this guild, and at first he was getting a lot of guys, an awful lot of guys. I once pointed out to him that the board of the guild had no one on it who worked in comics. Him, Engelhardt, who was writing novels at the time, a couple other people. Finally, they got Claremont. He was the only guy who was on the board who actually was working in the business. So I kept telling Neal, I said, Neal, I'm going to make things better for people. I said, and that's what you want to do. I said, but you give me time. Give me a break here. I said, you're making it hard for me. He's saying, oh, I think it'll put pressure on them upstairs. I said, they don't need any pressure. I said, the pressure's all on me. I said, just, would you not do this? He was adamant, though. He thought he was doing the right thing. He was trying to help people from the outside, and I was trying to help people from the inside. But we had the same goal. In fact, during that time, he's inviting me to his parties. We're hanging out. We were friends, but we'd often talk about the copyright situation. And the funny thing was, Neal was filming a movie. He was making a movie called Nannaz at the time, and he asked me to do this little bit part in it. He needed somebody freakishly tall, so.
You were in it?
Yeah.
Oh, I want to see that. That's great.
Yeah, Nannaz. It's called. It was a hit in Europe. I don't think it got big distribution here.
How do you spell that? How do you spell that?
Nannaz. Nannaz.
Oh, wow. Okay.
It's the name of a stuffed monkey, is what it is. A toy monkey.
Oh, okay.
And the secret plans are hidden in the monkey, and the kids don't want to lose the monkey, and they're running away from all the evil bad guys. Oh, like me. Anyway, but the point, yeah, it's great. But so he asked me to be in his movie, so I go down to I didn't want to do it, but he bullied me into it, and I went to where they were filming downtown someplace. The first thing he wants me to do is sign a work for hire. I said, wait. You, Neal Adams, are asking me to sign a work for hire. You're kidding me, And he said, well, it's my movie. I'm like, duh. I said, yes, Neal, I will cheerfully sign your work for hire. And I did. But I thought, are you kidding me? Neal Adams asking me? Anyway, we were buddies. And what happened was, I did get some people to sign it. Like I said, Bill Mantlo was eager to be on our side. A few other people. A lot of people wouldn't sign it. Then the DC implosion came. This is June-ish, 1978. DC cancels 40% of their titles on one day.
Yes.
Okay. The next morning, I had a line out the door into the lobby, and people standing in the elevator or in the downstairs in the lobby waiting to get up to come and sign that piece of paper. And so everybody kind of signed it then.
So that DC implosion changed the dynamic on the work for hire contract from that law.
Everybody signed it. The Marvel guys were in line to sign it because they thought if they didn't, the DC guys would sign it and take their jobs.
Yeah, exactly.
So the Marvel guys are in line and the DC guys are in line, and some of them had been standing there for 4 or 5 hours. They came in the middle of the night, and when I come in, there's this long line. I said, holy cow. And everybody wanted to sign the work for hire. A lot of those were signed, countersigned by Sol Brodsky, because he was a vice president. He could sign a contract. And so a lot of them, I shipped them down the hall to sign it, to let Sol sign it. So anyway, that pretty much put an end to the guild. The other thing that put an end to the guild was, it was a big meeting. Neal had a huge studio in this nice big area, and he invited everybody. And there were a couple hundred guys there. Okay. And he invited me, and I said, are you kidding? You're having a union meeting and you're inviting management. What's wrong with you? He said, no, I want you to be there. All right. He also invited Levitz. So here we are, me and Paul, like, what are we doing here? Hundreds of comic book guys. And so when Neal was about to start the meeting, I said, hold it. I said, listen, here's what I propose. I said, I will leave the room and you take a vote. If there's one person who doesn't want me here, I'll go. You know, Neal said, shut up and sit down. so I shut up and sat down. And they had this meeting, and Neal was talking about how great it was going to be and everything. And he had some weird idea that Marvel was making hundreds of millions of dollars. And no, we're not. We're losing money. You know, and Levitz was saying, no, Neal, you're wrong. You know, the companies are losing money. And Neal was proposing that the union would assign the work, and that pencilers were going to get start at $800 a page. And that time we were paying Don Perlin $35 a page, you know. So anyway, I finally got to talk, and I said, look, guys, I said, let's just assume that Neal is right and that I could pay $800 a page. I said, you new guys who, you know, aren't quite Neal Adams yet. I said, you think I'm going to hire you for $800 a page? I said, I'll hire Neal. I'll hire Leonard Starr. You know, Stan Drake. Sure. I said, but you know, you're not going to suddenly go from $40 a page to $800 a page, and that's all fine. No, it's not happening. Levitz expanded on that. Two things went wrong for Neal. One is he was saying he wanted justice for the old creators. Steve Ditko was in the room, and so and I was with him on that, man. I'll tell you, he had helped Siegel and Schuster, and wanted to help Kirby and Ditko. And he started talking about what they were going to do. Poor Steve Ditko, he doesn't own anything, and blah, blah, blah. Steve jumped up and he said, I'm not going to be the poster boy for anything. He said, I was an adult when I made that deal, and I will honor it. He said, if they want to give me money, fine. He said, but he said, don't you make me into your, cause celeb. So that brushed him back a little bit. And the next thing that happened was we were talking about artwork return. They were talking about artwork return. And Neal said that the position of the guild was that the penciler was the artist and the inker was an assistant. And so all the pages belonged to the penciler. And if he chose to give some to the inker, then he'd give some to the inker. Whereupon 50 inkers walk out. Okay. And a lot of people were disgruntled. And so, like I said, and then very shortly after that, DC imploded, and that was the end of the guild. It wasn't the end of Neal and I being friends. I'll tell you that. We're still friends. I see him at conventions once in a while, and we're good buddies, and he yells at me for whatever he needs to yell at me for. It's good stuff. Well, he's Neal Adams. He can do anything he wants. I wrote his introduction to the Hall of Fame.
Yeah. Oh, that's awesome. Okay.
Yeah.
So
anyway.
then, and it sounded like the epic creator line, like Starlin, for example, he shifts over from the Marvel Cosmic to Dreadstar around this time. Was some of this talks about the work for hire and then him owning his stuff? Is that what kind of shifted him over, basically?
No. When Jerry Conway was editor-in-chief for 3 weeks, that's when Steve Englehart quit. Jerry was trying to reason with him. Jerry did it right. He was telling Steve, you're committed to write 3 books a month, and you only write 2. And so one is always late, or they're all always late. He said, why don't you just write 2 for a while? Pick the 2 you want. And when you get ahead on those, fine, maybe we'll give you another book. And Englehart, I don't know what was wrong, but he kept saying, well, you're cutting my income by 1/3. Jerry says, you're only delivering 2 scripts. You're getting paid for 2. You're not cutting anything. He quits. At the same time, I think in sympathy to his buddy Englehart, Starlin quits. And he did some stuff for DC, I guess. I don't know. And then when I was editor-in-chief, when I took the job, one of the deals I made with the president was that we were going to do creator-owned stuff, not in the Marvel Comics, in addition to the Marvel Comics.
There's a photo I saw of you, I think in 1980 or 81. It's San Diego Comic Convention, and I think you're doing a panel with Wally Wood. Do you remember that?
Well, I remember being there with Wally Wood. I couldn't tell you what the panel was
about. The panel was. And, so he died. There was a suicide like shortly after that. First, and I remember you told us in the last interview how important Daredevil 7 was and what an important plot it was. And that was really considered like, a Wally-Wood plot. Would you say that? Daredevil 7?
Woody was like Jack and Steve. I mean, he wasn't just going to sit there and wait for you to do something. He was going to contribute. And he did contribute. And I thought stuff was wonderful. I mean, when he was there, he did a few things while I was there. But, the most of the work was before my time. That's San Diego, by the way.
Say that again.
That's San Diego, which was that was before Woody died. He sat next to me at the banquet. I had Adam West on this side and his wife, and Wally on this side. That's great. So we're sitting there. They had this banquet, and it's hot in this room, and Woody had on like some kind of T-shirt, a shirt over that, a sweater, and then something on top of that. I'm like, holy cow. And so I'm talking to Adam West for a second, and all of a sudden, Woody's gone. What happened? He comes back wearing like a parka. And I said, what's wrong? He says, I'm freezing, man. I'm just freezing. I thought, this is a man with poor circulation, And he was very sick, man, very sick. And so, when he ended it, might let Mike Zeck tell you that story. I mean, Mike took him to the hospital, picked him up at the hospital, took him home. He's the last person to see Woody.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So you felt something was wrong with him.
Oh, I knew something was wrong. This guy he was kind of gray-skinned, and he's freezing in a parka in a hot room. I'm like, oh, God, I feel so bad. But what can I do? I couldn't think of anything to do.
Did you guys talk much during that banquet?
Oh, yeah, I talked a lot. I talked to Adam West and his wife, talking to Woody, having a ball. It's like
do you remember anything specific that you and Woody talked about during that?
Just comics.
Stuff.
Old days, comics, Captain Action. We did Captain Action together.
Right. So you guys talked about that a little bit.
Well, yeah, and he said nice things about my layouts and stuff. I mean, he basically got the idea from what I drew, and then he did it right.
Right.
But he was a nice guy. He was cranky as hell. I mean, he would, and he also would he say outrageous things just to, get an argument going or whatever. He was a character, and he had fun, and everybody who knew him knew that when he was kidding. And like he was best buddies with Jack Abel. They were friends. He gave Jack this beautiful painting of Jack, and Jack just loved it. But they would, Jack was pretty good at banter too, and they'd get into it. And it was funny as hell because they're best friends, But a stranger passing by might not know that. Anyway, good guy.
So now that so you weren't shocked by his death. I
was shocked by the suicide, but I wasn't.
The suicide part of it. Yeah. So then now we're going to enter 1979, 1980-ish. Right. And last time we were talking about there was a changing of the guard. Honestly, some of the old artist writers left and new ones came in. And I was obviously a product and a fan of the new ones. But last time we were talking, you mentioned that of why Chaykin left, and that you would talk about that when the subject came up. Would you like to talk about that and some of the other artists too?
Yeah, all right, let's start with Chaykin. I mean, basically, last time we did an interview, your partner, he, in a kind of a snide way, I thought, he rattled off this list of people who had some grudge against me, didn't like me, and the implication was that I was delusional for thinking that I hadn't done anything wrong. And it was a condemnation. It was like, how can all these people be wrong? Well, and I told him, sometimes somebody is entirely wrong, not always. I mean, I have my problem with Roy. Okay, Roy's position was reasonable. We had a difference. Okay, I disagreed. All right, and he, as a result of that, decided to leave for a while, and then he came back. Nobody talks about him coming back. You know, he came back. I have a letter from him saying how agreeable it was to be back at Marvel, and, you know, how great he felt about it and stuff. All right, well, you always hear, you know, the scathing denunciation, and nobody hears the apology. Chaykin, I said, was entirely wrong. And your friend's like, oh, so Mooney was wrong and this guy was wrong. You know, no, some of them had reasonable issues that, you know, reasonable people could disagree about. And what I wrote to you in an email was, I said, some people were part of the problem. I had a lot of problems. Marvel was a mess, and I was fixing it. And if you give me a name, I'll tell you exactly what part of the problem that person was. And I'll tell you what I did to try to resolve it peacefully and productively. And I'll tell you exactly why that couldn't happen. And they either had to leave or were fired. I only fired a very few people. I think more people died than I fired. But anyway, and I didn't kill them.
And that's true. And you definitely didn't kill anybody.
Yeah, so back to Chaykin. All right. We had this project. Chaykin was pretty fast. He can draw pretty fast. He had done the Star Wars adaptation for us. Did a good job. But he wasn't like a regular on any book. He would float in and out. So anyway, we had this. We were going to do this adaptation of a James Bond movie. It was the one with the skiing. I can't remember. So all right, fine. So I assigned that to Denny O'Neil. All right, and so Denny was going to edit this thing, and we agreed that Howard could draw it because he was fast, and it was, you know, those things always start late. You know, I mean, nothing you can do about it. They start behind the 8 ball, and Howard was, you know, going to be fast enough to do it. So okay, so one time Howard was in the office and just hanging around with the guys. A lot of people after hours, you know, just come in and just hang out, talk comics, whatever. So a bunch of us decided we're going to go out to dinner. So Howard decided to come. Okay, cool. And he'd been there for hours, and I'm thinking, like, don't you have a deadline? You know, it's like, I'm not saying anything. So we went out and got something to eat, and then for some reason Howard had to go back to his apartment, which was on 26th Street. And we were right in the area. So we all went. It was me, Roger Stern, a couple other guys. And so we go into his apartment, and there sitting at a drawing table is Alan Kupperberg drawing the book that I'm paying Howard Chaykin rates for. Okay? And Howard didn't bat an eye about it. You know, like I go over and I said, what's this? And he says, I'm drawing this, you know. And I said, oh, you're drawing. Okay. And then Howard was showing us stuff, his work area. Howard is totally colorblind. He can only use paints that have the name of the color on them because he can't see the color. Most people don't know that because he does paint pretty well. But he uses it right out of the tube because he can't mix colors either because he can't see them. All right, so at any rate, fine. So I asked Howard about that. I said, you know, what Kupperberg's doing this? I'm paying you? Kupperberg's doing it? Because he was cheaper. And Howard said, well, I touch it up, you know. All right, that was bad. But we needed that book. And I thought, all right, I'm looking at it. It'll do. All right. At the same time, then, one of Howard's conditions to do the book is that he would get to paint the cover, because when you get the cover back, you can sell that for a lot of money. So, at any rate, like I said, this was assigned to Denny. And I had never read the screenplay. I assumed it was in good hands with Denny. Denny hadn't read it either. So Howard goes and creates a cover, and Denny didn't care much about art, and he just, whatever you want, Howard. So Howard comes in with this big painting, and it's James Bond and these 4 girls in the skimpiest bikinis you can imagine. all right? Little, nothing bikinis. The circulation guy saw this, Ed Chaykin. He said, we can't put that on the newsstand. He said, that has to be sold from behind the counter. We can't put this on the newsstand. And I said, well, it's what's in the movie, you know? And so anyway, we sent a copy of it to Pinewood to get approval. The guy calls me. He says, we can't approve this. This is terrible. And I said, all right. Well, he said he was going to be in New York the next day. I said, where are you staying? He was staying near Marvel, actually. I said, I will come to you and you tell me exactly what we need to do, okay? I'll bring it. I'll bring the real painting. So I take the painting, have it all wrapped up, go to his hotel room. I take it out of the wrapper, and I said, well, what exactly is wrong? He said, well, the likenesses are terrible. I said, all right, I got that. All right, the people's likenesses have to be better. I said, anything else? He said, why aren't they wearing clothes? I said, isn't this what is in the movie? He said, no, they're skiing. They should have ski suits on. He said, why would you draw them in bikinis? I said, I'll fix it. So I went back to the office. First, I went to O'Neill and said, what are you doing? How could you not know this? And I didn't read it. I figured Howard would read it, you know. So I call Howard. And I say, Howard, we got to change this. I said, they need the likenesses fixed. They need, these people should be wearing ski suits and stuff. He says, I delivered it. It was approved. I'm not doing that. And I said, Howard, you didn't follow what's in the movie. You need to make right. He loses his mind. And finally, I said, look, I'll pay you for your time. How's that? Okay? You come in, do the corrections, we'll pay you. So I said, when can you come in? He said, I'll see you at 1:00. So I went out to lunch for about half an hour. I'd left there about 11:45. Got a burger someplace, came back. And as I'm coming in, Howard's coming out. He was already there. And he also told me when I asked him for corrections, he says, well, I can't mix those colors again. I've thrown that away. I said, Howard, it was your house. You told me you couldn't mix colors. You showed me the tubes with the names on them. I said, this stuff all came out of a tube. You know? Well, I threw that palette away. I said, I pay you, fix it. He comes in, he did some little touch-up, and I see him on his way out. I go look at the painting. It's still wrong. It's still all wrong. So I went to John Romita. I said, what are we going to do here? He said, John Tartaglione paints. I said, he does? Okay. So I took it to John. I said, can you fix this? I got a reference photo. I said, can you fix this? He said, yeah. I said, fix it on a patch. Put a patch over it and fix it on the patch so you're not messing with Howard's painting. So John Tartag did the likenesses perfectly, did the costumes perfectly. Okay? And that's how the cover ran. All right. So Howard loses his mind. He says, oh my God, that's not what I painted. Now I can't sell the painting, and you done me terrible damage. And I said, no, you did us terrible damage. Why didn't you do it right in the first place? So anyway, he's furious and he's screaming and stuff. And he was going to go over my head, try to get me fired. That wouldn't work. Several people tried that, and Golden called me up and said, who's this guy? Who's Gene Colan? I don't know. So anyway, so I was talking to the brand new publisher, Mike Hobson, was there. And I was talking to him about it. And he said, why don't we get the guy in? He says, I'm really good with people. He said, I'm really good with people. And I guess that meant I was abrasive. Maybe I am. I don't know. But he said, let me talk to him. So Howard comes in, tells Mike what, his delusional story. And so Mike agrees to pay him $1,000. And he comes, he says, all right, I settled it. We paid him $1,000. I said, you paid him? All right, fine. Let it go. But to this day, Howard tells the story that I'm some crazy maniac who forced him, who just did capricious and idiotic things. No, not at all. I'll tell you what, a lot of the blame goes on O'Neill, who should have been doing his job, but he wasn't. And that was one of several incidents like that. But at any rate, like I said, you tell me the guy, I'll tell you what part of the problem he was. I'll tell you how I tried to fix it. And if it just couldn't happen, it didn't happen. Some guys had a good case, but I disagreed. I had a different point of view, like with Roy. Some guys were just not doing their jobs. I mean, basically, if you go through all the people who worked there, none of the people who were doing their jobs had any problem with me.
I would say that a couple things. One, we had Howard on, like a year ago or so, and he mentioned there was an interaction. He didn't give us any details on it, but do you feel that did that in any way, or is it possible if that in any way, then and I don't like to use this term, but I just want to ask your opinion of it because I've heard theories on this and I want your input. Could that have in any way blackballed him from Marvel and DC in like from 80 to 82 time frame?
Well, first of all, there's no way I had any authority or influence
at DC. Yeah.
So that had nothing to do with it. Second, I never did that to anybody. Even when Doug Minch did an interview accusing me of the murder of Gene Day, which Gene's brother wrote to my blog and said he's crazy. Jim had nothing to do with it. Marvel had nothing to do with it. He was a sick man. All right. Even after that, I didn't tell anybody, don't use Doug Minch. But most people didn't want to use him anyway. All right. Archie Goodwin I guess Doug proposed something once about doing an epic comic. And Archie said, I'm going to use Minch on this epic comic. Okay. Fine. I wouldn't stand in anybody's way of making a living. If somebody was a real bad guy, Gil Kane, one of my favorite human beings in the whole world, brilliant man, Hall of Fame, Grandmaster, you name it. He had done some like double vouchering and stuff, and that came up, and I said, all right, we'll forget that, but don't do that anymore. And he repaid, he let us publish Black Mark, which we lost money on, but that was his repayment. So then he did it again. He actually did it 2 more times. Once I caught it and said, Gil, you can't do this. Well, he was desperate for money. And the 3rd time it happened, Barry Kaplan, he had no authority over me. And he couldn't tell me who I could hire and who I couldn't hire. He said, go ahead, use him. He said, I won't honor the vouchers. I said, I'll never pay that guy a dime again. And he said, so you can use whoever you want. I can't stop you. He said, but I can make sure no checks cut. I said, okay. So Gil and I, had to part company there. P.S. The end of that story is that he found plenty of other work, and at the end of that story is years later. I was at WonderCon in the Bay Area, and Gil was there, and his wife, and there was an old guys panel. There was like Will Eisner, Julie Schwartz, Gil Kane, Joe Kubert, me. I was the youngest old guy. And I don't know who else was there, but we had this great raucous panel. It was wonderful. And after that panel, as I'm leaving, Gil, first of all, he said, Jim, I come over and he shakes my hand. He says, I just want to tell you, like how much I appreciate all you did for me, because I did a lot for him. And his wife hugged me. It's like, okay. And they were just like you were excellent with us. You did your best for us. And I said, yeah, I did, because you're the best. You're one of the greatest of all time, and I like you.
Yeah.
Not that counts. I do it for somebody who didn't like me too. I don't care. It was about the job. I had no spite. I had no malice. I never screwed anybody. They can tell you what they want. I'll give you the answer.
Right. And I would say I have a couple things to kind of wrap into this. One is, like 1976, there was creators that left. There was Dick Ayers, Rich Buckler, Jerry Conway, Steve Englehart, Jack Abel kind of left for a while, and they left for their own reasons in 1976, completely unrelated to you. Then in 1980, when the next batch of artists like Mensch and Colin and Wolfman, Thomas, and I use the word artists as a all-encompassing term, but Mike Plug, whatever, when they left, the Comics Journal and Gary Groth immortalized that moment in time for you with these artists. And then even though, like, let's say years later, everyone got along with their lives and everyone did fine and everyone is all friendly, the problem though is that then the Comics Journal and acolytes of the Comics Journal have like frozen this moment in time in their minds like forever. And I would say that it's like it's hard for them to let it go when it's like but it's a business happens is how I look at it. I would also say another thing is that I would say my partner, my co-interviewer Jim Thompson and we come from different vantage points generationally. You know, he's a product of 70s Marvel. I'm a product of 80s Marvel. So, you know, we have obviously different things that touched our hearts at that critical, you know, 12 to 14-year-old time frame. So we come at it differently. I would say his intention wasn't to be snide, though. I just have to say it.
You're defending your partner, and I that's
to say fine. That I think his intention was just to try to get a good interview.
Maybe I'm too sensitive, but let me tell you something. When all those people you named left, Jack Abel didn't leave out of any fit of anger. He got work for DC. That was before my time. That was when I started. Jack came back to Marvel.
That's right. And my point in saying that is that it's not all. It's like they had their own circumstances in 76. People leave, people come. It's just that something happened in 79, 80 where the Comics Journal and fandom and there's.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. At various times, people did come and go. Some of them just because, hey, I got an offer over here. You know, fine. Right. Like I said, Jack. You know, he worked for Marvel and DC. He inked some adventure comics of mine,
right,
over Kurt Swan, and then he did what did he do at Marvel? Iron Man, maybe? I don't know. But he did stuff at Marvel, and the thing is that was fairly common. Dick Ayers, I was before my time. I don't know why he left. Jerry Conway, the first time he left was because Stan had promised him that if Roy Thomas ever left, that he would give Jerry the editor-in-chief job.
Yeah.
Okay, so Roy leaves. Marv and Len together went to Stan and said, everybody hates Jerry. You can't hire him. It'll be a problem. You know, no one will want to work here. And Stan, for some reason, bought it. And at that time, he was still powerful. He was, I think, the president of the company. Had influence over the comics. So he was like, well, who can we get? And Marv said, Len, you know. So Len was hired. All right. Jerry quit. He and Len used to be roommates. They were good friends, you know. And so when he was passed over, Jerry quit, went to DC. When Marv was let go years later, Roy was going to come back. He changed his mind at the last minute. And Stan remembered, hey, I once promised this to Jerry. So he called him at DC. Jerry took the job. Didn't work out. 3 weeks later, that was done. And then he became a contract writer for Marvel for a long time. The reason he left again was because, I told you, there was a lot of corruption and stuff, all right? Wasn't really Jerry, but he did, he was involved. The way he was involved was this. We had this production manager named John Verpoorten, sweet guy, and in malice toward none, charity for all, too much charity. So what would happen is somebody like Frank Giacoya or Jerry or somebody with Gil Kane, they'd get late, they need money, they need a check, and John would let them voucher something in advance. Some guys had a couple things vouchered in advance. That means they've got to do a month of work for which they've already been paid. So instead, they'd go to DC, you know, where they had a clean slate. That was before and a little bit during the beginning of my time. The Jerry was supposed to write 8 books a month, and he couldn't do it. You see a lot of things plotted by Jerry, written by me or others, or Don Glut or his wife, or he couldn't keep up 8 books a month. So, but he kept vouchering ahead, and John he got nothing out of this. He was just too soft-hearted. He couldn't turn Giacoya down if Giacoya was in trouble. P.S. A lot of books that have Giacoya's name as inker, John inked them.
Oh,
he was a good inker, so he would do it for him. If Frank owed a couple jobs, John would do them. And then you get Frank off the hook. The other thing John would do is if a guy just didn't deliver, he kept moving the book back. Issue 3 becomes issue 7. Issue 7 becomes issue 15. And then he would finally, after a while, then he could write it off as obsolete inventory. It didn't exist. One time auditors came. And so what they did is they took an old Conan book, put a new splash page on it. See, here's the book. No, it wasn't the book. Anyway, so Jerry got to the point where he owed Marvel so much money that he ended up going to DC. He admitted to the people at DC he owed Marvel a lot of money. Marvel, this is just before I started as editor-in-chief. This is late 77. DC said, we'll take it out of your pay a little tiny bit at a time, and we'll pay Marvel. They sent the check for reasons I do not know to John Verpoorten. $40,000. $40,000. Now, John gets this check. What's he going to do? If he takes it up to the accounting department, all kinds of questions are going to be asked, and guess what? He's going to be in trouble, right? So he doesn't know what to do. Puts it in his desk drawer, okay? Sits there, right? Finally, DC calls, and they end up talking to the accounting department. They're saying, why didn't you cash our check? And Barry Kaplan says, what check? Anyway, so when I come in, this all comes to light, all right? And that John was doing this thing. In accounting terms, it's called lapping, when you keep moving something back, lapping. And we figured that out. And Barry Kaplan told me once, he said, I owe you my job. I said, why? He said, because when you discovered this, me and the bookkeeper, Millie Sheriff, figured it out. When you discovered this, he said, it was hundreds of thousands of dollars that was taken on my watch, financial officer. And you said, I don't need a forensic accounting, credential on my resume. Say you figured it out. And that's exactly what he did. He told the president of the company, hey, I discovered this. It saved his job. Okay? So, what do I care? I'm not there to do forensic accounting. I'm there to make it run. And it did, finally. But, so there's a story behind each one of these things. There's a story behind Gil. It's a story behind Jerry. I don't know some of the other ones. Like I said, at some of them, people they had an opportunity at DC or someplace and they took it. That's fine, and some people work both sides of the street. Like Jack Abel did that, actually. Anyway. So, like I said, if they were doing their jobs, I had no problem with them. They had no problem with me.
I would also say this is that, I, as a product of 80s Marvel, you fostered what I think it is my favorite age of Marvel. I like 60s and 70s too, but it's only because 80s was my gateway to then read the older stuff. But basically, I don't take it as personally as, someone that's maybe 10 years, older than me who looks at it differently, right? See, I look at it like, well, look, you got Larry Hama's G.I. Joe. You got Chris Claremont's X-Men just flourishing under you. Then you have, John Byrne's Fantastic Four. You have Walt Simonson's Thor. You have Louise Simonson on New Mutants and, Power Pack, and Frank Miller's Daredevil, and then Bill Sienkiewicz on New Mutants and Elektra Assassin. It's like when you look at that talent, you have Mark Gruenwald really, I thought, hitting it out of the park on Captain America. And so into the Marvel Universe books, how I look at that as you took Marvel, instead of it being like this artsy cult, you turned it into a mainstream entertainment franchise is really what you did. So I look at it as maybe it's a generational vantage point that some people have a certain sentiment towards some things, and then they grow out of it at a certain stage. So then like everything after this stinks. But frankly, I think yours was the best era. You transformed.
Well, thank you. Listen, something no one ever does is make a list of the people who liked me.
Right. And I would say when I asked those guys, or at least some of those guys that I've talked to, including Ron Wilson and Dennis Cowan, who you gave work to that no one else did before that, that they all like you. I'm just saying. So
yeah, and the thing is that, like I say, I mean, you don't read about that because it doesn't make good copy in the Comics Journal. But the people who were doing their jobs, Walt Simonson, he gave you the best he could every time, And the editors I had, they all, with the exception of Carlin and Denny, Carlin wasn't doing his job. There were exactly 2 editors I had in the whole time I was there whose assistants came to me quietly to say, this guy doesn't do his job and I'm sick of it. All right. Mike Higgins, about Carlin, Linda Grant, and Don Daly, who didn't compare notes, by the way, about Denny. And finally, each of those 2 guys had to go. All right. I don't regret that at all. I was told by the president to fire Denny and through Hobson. And I fired Carlin because he really deserved it.
Okay. So then because I was going to ask you about the Denny O'Neil, because he left DC in like 78, 79, probably part of the implosion maybe. And then before the implosion. Okay. And so then what, and then you were asked to fire him. Why?
When Denny left DC, he was thrown out. Okay. I think he had a contract that came to the end. They said, go away. All right. He came to me basically kind of hat in his hand. And he just wanted to be a writer. He was really depressed. He was really kind of downcast. He said, well, I can't do it as well as I used to, but, I'll give you a solid story and, just want to make a living and, and I said, you're Denny O'Neil. I said, you could teach people. You're great, And so I kind of talked him into becoming an editor because, God, I needed help. And so he took the job as editor. And I think on the same day, Louise Simonson, Denny O'Neil, and Larry Hama all started on the same day. That's a good day. Mm-hmm. But at any rate, and if Denny did nothing else at Marvel except help Frank Miller learn, which he did, he worked with. It was really funny. Denny was kind of lackadaisical. When it was something to do with Miller, he perked up. He could see that this guy is going to be a star, and so he poured his heart into working with Frank. I know that. But other than that, I mean, for a while he was okay, and then stuff started happening, like the whole Chaykin affair, and more and more he just wasn't doing his job. And in those days, if you were on staff, you could also do freelance. More and more, he was spending his whole day at the office writing his freelance and letting his assistant do everything. And Linda Grant told me, she says, "Who am I to tell John Byrne something?" She said, I can't, do his job. And I warned him a number of times. I said, "Denny, if you don't start doing your job, I know what you're doing, so cut it out." And he wouldn't. And then Don Daly, Linda got married and went someplace. Don Daly came in, and not too long after comes to me with the same complaint. And he and Linda never met. So it wasn't like she coached him or something. So finally, then Hobson told me, he says, "You got to fire this guy now." And I said, "Oh, all right." So I did. Walt was upset. He said, "How can you fire Denny O'Neil?" And I said, "Walt, you don't know what happened. I said, I'll be glad to tell you someday, but it was justifiable." And P.S. Denny got a job back at DC the next day. So
right.
It wasn't as traumatic as it might have been. Anyway, but here's the deal. I think that you look at the guys who were doing their jobs, all right? And you talk about how artsy some of the Marvel stuff was in the early 70s. Yeah, you had McGregor, you had Gerber, a few other. I had Gerber for a while. You had, people like P. Craig Russell, but he didn't leave. He stuck with us. And he would do jobs for Archie and for us sometimes. But you had some really good people. True. And Archie Goodwin fired McGregor. All right. Gerber was a whole legal hassle. I don't know who else you got. Englehart was left when Jerry was there, and he came back when I was there. He came back, one by one. We talk about every one of them. I'll tell you what the story was. I was never out to get anybody. I was trying to help everybody. I was trying to make things better, and we did. It wasn't just me. We all contributed, but we made things better. And hey, for a while there, everybody liked me. Yeah, and listen, tell your partner I'm over it. Okay, it's like he was trying to make it interesting and pick at the scabs a little bit, but I don't, no malice. I don't hold a grudge. He's a very smart, capable guy apparently, and give him my best.
I will. Thank you. I appreciate it. Is it true, I heard that George Lucas preferred certain artists for his Star Wars comics? Like, did he prefer Carmine Infantino, for example?
And there was never any input from the Star Wars people about artists.
I see. Okay.
Zero.
Now, Marvel Age magazine,
the story.
I enjoyed the FOOM, like especially the Steranko ones, and then Marvel Mania. I've collected those, and I was a Marvel Age reader as a kid. And tell us about how that got started off. What were you guys trying to do? I know Al Milgrom was part of it.
We had this direct market salesperson, the direct market manager, Carol Kalish, and Carol had. Before that, she had been writing for fanzines and stuff. It sort of annoyed me that Ed Chaykin decided to hire somebody who'd been writing articles trashing Marvel like a week before. But she did know the direct market pretty well, and and I didn't have any real problem with her. Okay, so Carol came up with the idea: why don't we do an in-house fan magazine? Sell it for very small money, try to get in all the comic book shops, Well, that seemed like a reasonable idea. They didn't ask me. Carol decided this, and she wanted to produce it. And Ed Chaykin was her boss. He was a vice president like me. And so I wasn't going to go fight with him over it. I thought, that's a good idea. Why is she doing it? But whatever. So she assigned it to Peter David, who was an assistant in the sales department at that point. And Peter, not a great designer. He designed this incredibly stupid logo with M, big A. So it was the A in Marvel as well as Age. And that's like an amateur logo. It's like, what? Also, Carol and Peter kind of did it in I'm sorry to say, fanish way. I mean, they were putting things in there. They're criticizing Marvel books, or they're no, this one's good. Don't buy this one. What? This is a house organ. This is a promotional vehicle. So I read a couple of those and I complained to Ed, and he said he'd talk and nothing ever happened. So then one day Stan comes in from the coast and he's looking through comics and he comes across Marvel Age. He comes into my office and he's as enraged as he gets. He never yelled. He wasn't impolite or anything. But he's how can you do this? I said, I don't have anything to do with it. He said, what do you mean? I said, the salespeople came up with this idea. They decided to do it themselves. I guess I could overrule Ed Chaykin, but I'm not going to. I'm not going to piss off the circulation guy. And I said, so this is all produced by people in the sales department. He lost his mind. He said, this is ridiculous. They're attacking our own books in our publication. I said, I know. So Stan goes upstairs to see Galton. And Galton calls me. He says, I just told Chaykin that you're going to be in charge of that book. And I said, fine. So I got Salicrup. he knocked it out of the park. He knew exactly what to do. He was positive. I mean, he wasn't going to tell you that something bad was good, but he was, he tried to make it an upbeat thing, and he made a better logo, and he got good art, and he made it work, and it was, I thought, fine. There are some people I go to conventions, they want me to sign Marvel Age. They collect Marvel Age. Okay. But I mean, he did it. Once it was in Salicrup's hands, and Salicrup was a professional, and he knew what to do, and he did it correctly, then it was fine. His first couple issues with Kalish and Peter David, I'm sorry, they're pretty amateur stuff. And, like I said, I didn't do anything about it. Stand it. And he didn't have any power, but he had the ear of the president. If he said, this is wrong, Galton would listen. And so we ended up doing Marvel Age, and I think that probably didn't improve the relationship between me and Carol. Peter and I don't know what Peter thinks of me. I mean, he started writing for us and was good. And every time I ever encountered him, we were friendly. So I was at a convention out in Long Island one time, and I saw him out there. He grabbed me, and we were talking, and he was going to be on this panel. He wanted me to go and listen to the panel. And it was fine. I don't, whatever sting he got from having that book taken away from him, he either got over it or he never felt it. So
I see. So now, tell me about working with Danny Fingeroth. He did a lot for SpiderMan. How was working with Danny?
Danny was great. Danny was I think he worked with Louise. He worked with somebody.
He did. He did. He worked under Louise. Yeah. Yeah,
and she taught him a lot. And when he became editor, he did a good job. And he was efficient. He kept the books on time. They were good. He got along with everybody. If he had a big problem, he'd dump it on me. Now, I mean, a couple times, like Bill Mantlo wanted to do a Spider-Man story where Peter Parker fathers an illegitimate child. And Danny told him, no, can't do that. And Bill threw such a fuss that finally he called me. He said, would you talk to him? I said, okay. So he comes in, and I told him, no. And, well, why not? I said, because, Spider-Man is licensed all over the world. Every single contract says we won't do something like that.
Yeah.
Okay. And I said, what if it's a slow news day and the president of Union Underwear wakes up, reads the paper, there's an article about Spider-Man fathering an illegitimate child. Well, there go your underoos.
Yeah.
And it's you can't do that. I said, you want to do that story? Fine. Do it for Epic Comics. Call him Arachnid Man or something.
There you go.
Everybody will know it's Spider-Man, but do it in Epic, and he never did it. So I don't know. But, and Bill, he would get over stuff. He would be mad at you for 20 minutes, and then he'd be fine. And sometimes he was right. I'd say, he's right. And we fixed whatever it was. But I mean, that's the kind of thing. I mean, Danny was really good at handling people and handling everything. I thought he was fine.
And he seems to also share a mutual love for Stan Lee's style of writing in the comics in the 60s that you do. And so he probably had a sense of Marvel needs to be a certain way. And that probably helped with his Spider-Man editing, I'm sure.
Yeah, I guess so. But I mean, I don't think Marvel needed to be a certain way. I mean, when I came in there, it was kind of uniform. When I started as associate editor, it was like you had a few guys who would do kind of off the beaten trail stuff like Gerber or McGregor. But everybody else was kind of doing the, Stanley, Roy Thomas kind of deal. Even me, when I came in, I said, this is what you're supposed to do. So you look at my first books I wrote, there were a lot of copy, like Roy, a lot of reading material, Anyway, then when I came in, I said, no, we should have no limits. And so when I got all these different editors, I encouraged them to do their own thing. And so, Louise's books were nothing like Larry's. And, and Archie could do anything he wanted.
Right.
And we started Star Comics, and there was no formula. No one dictated anything. Mm-hmm. I didn't go and tell Chris Claremont or his editors, you must do this in the X-Men. I tried to understand Chris Louise's and Anne's vision and help make that happen. And if something was just egregious, I'd say, no, Chris, you can't have these people in transvestite bondage gear.
That's true. I've heard about that story. So then, okay, so before we go into licensing, I want to ask one quick question, which is a bit of a fast forward, but then we're going to go back to the licensing stuff specifically.
Okay.
How did the Marvel Fumetti comic of 1984 come about?
Well, you notice there was a lot of kind of one-shot publishing then. You also notice that that's when we started doing X-Men reprints, classic X-Men.
Yeah, which I love those.
The reason was that Cadence Industries owned a whole bunch of companies. Marvel was the crown jewel. The second crown jewel was Curtis Circulation. Then they had a bunch of losers. U.S. Pen and Pencil, Perfect Subscription, Vitamin Quota Shops, that's the theater chain in Boston, and a bunch of stuff. So around the time I started there, just before I started there in 76, the Cadence people brought in this guy named Shelley Feinberg, and he was famous for rescuing companies, right? And getting the stockholders out alive, you know? So what he did. When I got my first Marvel paycheck, it was drawn on a bank in Boston. Why? Because Shelley Feinberg tried everywhere to get credit for Cadence, and only one bank, the bank in Boston he used to deal with, would do it. So all Marvel checks were the Bank of Boston. I thought, well, that's weird. But anyway, they bring him in. And so what he did is he hired two guys right out of law school, a guy named Paul Hinden and a guy named Joe Calamari. And he said, you guys are going to be my hatchet men. I want you to go into each of these little companies. You know, you'll be authorized to run it. Cut the staff. Get rid of any deadwood. Strip it. Get it down to, you know, the most, losing the least money you can, you know, and we'll find ways to prop up the revenues and, you know, and then we'll sell them. This is exactly what they did. Calamari and Hinden went company to company, firing people wholesale, you know, selling off anything they could, cleaning the company up, and then they would try to put more money on the bottom line. How did they do that? Okay, they're part of the corporation, say, and so they could lay off some costs as corporate costs and reduce their expenditures, therefore making the revenues look better. Okay, phony, but that's how you do it. So anyway, they did this, and they're going around company to company doing this. And then Sheldon Feinberg and 6 members of the board formed Cadence Management Incorporated. And their goal was to, you know, reap the benefits of selling these companies and stuff, and especially Marvel. So, okay, there was like I say, they're going through this kind of dirty pool. I mean, Marvel was a division of Cadence, not even a separate company. It didn't have to be reported separately. So we were making lots of money. Well, they would clean that money out and use it for corporate and make it look like Marvel wasn't doing as well as it was. All right? Why? They were trying to depress the price of the stock. All right? And they did. And so they Cadence Management Incorporated was able to raise money and buy all the stock, basically take the company private. So the 7 guys owned it. One of those 7 guys pissed off Shelley Feinberg, so he got rid of him. So there were 6 guys that owned it. So okay, now they're going along this plan. They're, you know, stripping these companies, you know, selling them off or getting ready to sell them off. And there's this guy named Mario Gabelli. He's a corporate raider, like a Carl Icahn type. And he figured out their plan. Somehow he had shares of Marvel, and he figured out what they were up to. And so he starts buying up stock. He was going to do a hostile takeover. This is just before they took it private. Buying up stock. Fine. Now they need money to fight Mario Gabelli. So Galton brings in all the vice presidents one at a time, and he says, do whatever you can. I need money right now. Calls me and he says, what can you do? I said, well, I guess we could do some special publishing. We do X-Men reprints, you know. So anyway, I did that. Classic X-Men. We did the Fumetti book. We did the No Prize book. We did some Hembeck stuff, other things, junk publishing. But some of them had some merit, and they all sold pretty well. And so I was able to kind of, out of the clear blue, make them some millions of dollars to fight Mario Gabelli. And because of money I made them, no other vice president called and told me that nobody else produced any revenues but me. And so he said, but I produced enough. They actually were able to buy Mario Gabelli out. And they continued their plan. They eventually sold all the companies except Curtis and Marvel. They sold Curtis Circulation for receivables. It's a service company. You can't sell it for a multiple. And then they wanted to sell Marvel. So all that junk publishing was to get them to the point of selling Marvel, to fend off Mario Gabelli, keep them going until they could cash in. And they did. They sold Marvel. When they recaptured all the stock, they had depressed the price of the stock down to about $10, okay, a share, and so they were able to get it at a super bargain rate, and that money, those shares are worth 3 or 4 times that if you actually had the real numbers on the 10Q and 10K reports, but. So they were able to buy it cheap, and then they sold it, and they lined their pockets. And I'll tell you something about that another little detail about that book, the Fumetti book. I had Elliot Brown take the pictures. And I don't remember who the editor was, but he did a good job. And Elliot took great pictures, all right? Our production man was a guy named Milt Schiffman, not in-house production, printing production. Milt was an older guy. He really had no expertise. He had been the financial officer in the company council back in the 60s. And when the new people took over back then, they didn't want to fire him. So they just kept him on. And his job was twice a month, he would sign his name on an invoice. Because it was all word color press. There was nothing to supervise, nothing to manage. Okay. So now when I'm there, we're doing books in color, we're doing different formats and stuff like that. And getting those done was a nightmare because one time I wanted to use better red ink. I said, we're using Rhodium. Why don't we use something better? He said, Jim, there's only 3 inks in the world. There's red, there's cyan, and yellow. I said, no, there's a lot of ink in the world. It's all different kinds. Let's get a better one. He didn't believe there was a better ink. I would call East Coast Graphics, and I said, pull me some proofs with Rhodium and Rotobene. And they did. And the Rotobene looked much better, But Milt didn't even know that they existed. So when we went to do the Fumetti book, we had it all. We knew how to do it in art production. It was ready to go to a separator. Milt sent it to chemical color plate. He sent photos to a hand separator. What the hell? And so they get this book. They don't know what to do with it. So they shot it. They made film with their crummy camera. And so it's all blurry and, grainy.
Could have been better, yeah.
Like, what?
So Elliot R. Brown took those pictures, not Vince Coletta.
Elliot Brown took most of them. Vince might have taken a couple. I don't know. I was whichever editor was handling that was somebody I trusted, and I left them alone. Yeah, the main participation was to stand behind everybody doing the human pyramid.
Yeah, because Elliot R. Brown also did photos of like cityscapes that they would use in some covers, or also like the live action covers of. Yeah,
he was a great photographer, and he was also he was our science consultant. He seemed to know everything. He could do mechanical drawings. He did all the mechanical drawings in Marblades were Elliot Brown. He was a great technical. They gave me a watch for my 30th birthday. It was beautiful. It was wonderful. I wore it every day. And I don't like wearing watches. I can't stand them, but I had to wear this. I wanted to wear it because there was a gift from everyone. And it was real complicated. It has all these little buttons and stuff. And so every year when the clocks changed, I had to go to Elliot to fix my watch. So I couldn't figure it out. I had the instruction book. I still couldn't figure it out.
So he's kind of an engineer too, actually.
Yeah, he was engineer, and he was one of Gruenwald's cronies when it came to doing when they built the haunted house in Gruenwald's office, or he was part of that little gang of people who did crazy stuff, and And the craziest thing he did was for my 30th birthday at a big party. I told him, I said, don't do it, guys. But they did it anyway. I mean, because things are going well and everybody's making lots of money. And for a brief while, they liked me. So they had this huge party, right? And they gave me gifts and stuff. I said, you're not supposed to be giving me gifts. It's like, okay, if I give you a gift, but your employees aren't supposed to do that. They didn't care. So at any rate, we were having this party, and on this big cart, a couple guys come pushing out a giant cardboard cake. I said, you guys got a stripper, or something. That's not good. Anyway, they sing happy birthday. Elliot Brown pops out of the cake with about, Elliot had a very heavy beard, so he had probably a day's worth of stubble. He's got a blonde wig on, makeup, lipstick. He's wearing a bikini. He pops out of the cake, runs over, kisses me on the cheek. I'm like, oh, Christ. And then he goes to the ladies' room to change clothes. But I mean, that's a kind of nonsense. I mean, look, you're working 14, 16 hours a day sometimes. You just need to do something.
That sounds like fun. Had its fun days too. Yeah.
Yeah, it was.
So now, so why was you had mentioned it, you alluded to it, but why was Mike Carlin let go? Because I know he was good friends with Grunwald. They were like, creative buddies in a way.
Remember I told you that there was only 2 editors whose assistants complained to me about the editor? All the editors at Marvel, they knew that I liked to promote from within. And so it was kind of a badge of honor if one of their assistants got promoted. All right. And it's, well, I really trained the guy. Okay. So everybody sort of lobbied for their assistants, to get, if the opening came up. Mark Grunwald is the only editor who ever came to me, closed the door and said, don't hire this guy. He said, he's terrible. He's a loser.
Oh.
And he's the only editor who ever came to me and said, don't hire this guy. Because Carlin was his assistant, and he didn't think he did the job very well. So I thought, well, what am I going to do? I mean, Carlin at that point was, I think, the eldest assistant. I mean, it was kind of his turn, So I sat down and I talked to him, and I didn't mention anything about Grunwald, but I talked to him and really tried to get a sense of him, right? And he said all the right things, And I thought, well, maybe he and Mark just don't get along. I don't know, So I thought, well, I'll give him a chance. We'll see how he does. And if it just doesn't work out, it doesn't work out. So I did hire him, and he was awful. He was terrible. I mean, I had to sign the books out before they went to the printer. So I get a book from Louise or from Larry or something, I'd read it, I caught a spelling error, something like that, usually, or nothing. If the editors knew what they were doing. Carlins would come in, and they were train wrecks. What's this? How are you going to read this? These balloons go to the wrong people. The pages are out of order, Mike. The lineup is wrong. You lined the book up wrong. This going to be printed out of order. So anyway, every time I do that, and I'd show them everything, and I'm like, you got to stop, get on the job here, right? And so he would say, oh, okay. And he'd go have everything fixed. This is every damn book. And I'm like, whoa, wait. And Higgins came to me. He said, the guy does nothing. He doesn't even look at the stuff. He says, I do a little bit, and that's all I can do. So I said, all right. So I called him in. And I said, Mike, you're not doing the job. And he starts arguing with me. It gets real nasty. And he says, well, why should I edit the books? You always go over them. You tell me what you need to fix. I'll get it fixed. I said, then why do I need you? And it was like insulting. And he says, well, you're going to, have everything changed anyway. I said, no, I'm going to have mistakes fixed. There is such a thing as a mistake. You spell something wrong. You line the book up wrong. That's a mistake. It needs to be fixed. And he gets all hostile with me. And I finally said, that's it. I said, I'm going to write a memo to the personnel department right now. You're fired. And I did. And I sent him upstairs to, so they could tell him what his benefits and stuff were. And he left. And DC picked him up. Because I think they thought if anybody worked at Marvel, because we were doing so well, they must know what they're doing. Well, the truth is that when Mike went over there, there was really no other game in town. And I think he started to straighten up and fly right a little bit. I mean, I think he realized I don't have many other places to go, and so I think he did much better work there than he did with me. He also didn't have anybody checking the books out and stuff like that, so he just did what he wanted, I guess.
Yeah. I liked his later Superman stuff. I know that.
Yeah, but he had good people. He had Louise. He had Roger Stern. He had what's his name, artist guy. Whatever. Anyway, the thing is, no, he had some great people, and I think that, like I said, he straightened up and flew right. He was not a dumb guy. I mean, he's a very bright guy. He just, I don't know, had some issue. And another thing is at DC, a lot of things are done by committee. Okay, like over at Marvel, if guy needed a raise, I mean, I controlled the rate sheet, and the editor would come to me and say, this guy isn't getting paid enough. We'd talk about it. We'd figure out, okay, well, he should be like this guy, or he's been here for 10 years, so we should respect that. And, we'd figure out what to pay people. It was just me and sometimes an editor. And at DC, they had a rate committee. They'd meet the committee, would talk about, what to pay people and stuff. And they had all these editorial committees and meetings and things. And, I thought, we can't work that way. That'd be terrible. I mean, you had to go to the committee with everything, Committee is a bunch of people who, no one's responsible. So anyway, but he thrived in that environment for some reason. And God bless him. I didn't hate him. I had no malice toward him. But if he wasn't going to do the job and he was going to yell at me, I don't need you. That's okay. I'd rather you go away.
So now, licensing deals. We're finally getting to licensing deals. So now the interesting thing is Star Wars, I think, probably just historically, like you said last interview, was that the money from that comic, from that licensed comic, helped give you a buffer zone, so then you can organize Marvel financially and get everything running on time. Star Wars gave you that buffer, whereas DC had an implosion. A question I have is, and there might be apple and oranges, but why did Star Wars, as Star Wars saved Marvel in a sense at that time, why didn't Superman the movie save DC in a similar way?
I think a couple reasons. I think it probably did give Superman a bump for a while, but that doesn't last forever. And also, if you were reading Superman in those days, it was pretty tepid. It wasn't good. It wasn't engaging. Whereas with Star Wars, I had Goodwin writing. I had, great artists. I had Al Williamson, I think, was working on it. Carmen Infantino. There was a good book. And then eventually Mary Jo Duffy was writing it after Archie trained her. She was brilliantly smart. And, she was starting to learn from me and with other editors. But when she started working with Archie, that was the best thing that ever happened to her, because you just sit in the room for a few minutes with Archie and you walk out smarter. So I believe he helped her quite a bit, and she became dangerous, and then she was doing it for a while. So it was a good book. It was a damn good book, and Archie did designed great covers. That's another thing. I let every editor design his own covers. I approved them, but that way you got a variety of covers, and some of these guys were just tremendous at it. Archie, Larry, everyone. They were, and the ones that needed help, they could all go talk to John Romita. He's right there. And Grandmaster Hall of Fame John Romita. He'll help you. so or me. Sometimes they come to me and I'd say, well, how about this? But most of the guys had a pretty good sense, and were pretty good at it. And some people did experimental stuff, and some people didn't. And that was fine. I wanted it to be wide open.
So then, was the success from the Star Wars license then what then led to more licenses after that?
Yeah, the thing is, the people upstairs, including the president, they never opened a comic book. They had no idea what was going on in the comic books. They just couldn't be bothered. And so whenever something would work, Galton would say, well, let's do that. So, we had the Conan license forever. So that was not a factor. But when Star Wars was such a huge hit, all of a sudden, every 5 seconds, I'm getting calls from Galton or the licensing people or somebody saying, "Hey, there's this movie coming out. It's Kingdom of the Spiders. We should do it." And I'm like, "No, but we have Spider-Man. It's nothing to do with Spider-Man." You know, and some of them I fended off successfully. But then some things, if Galton just had a crazy idea, that I'm stuck with it. And some of them were nightmares, like was it not E.T. Close Encounters? Okay, insisted we do Close Encounters. I said, all right. So I got Goodwin and Simonson. We're going to do the adaptation. Because I thought, well, let's make the best of it, And we were promised all kinds of stuff by the licensing people who sold it to us, right? And the studio who was supposed to deliver did not. They just simply ignored the contract. And so we couldn't even get the script. We couldn't get any reference. They said, no, it's a secret. We got to keep it all quiet. I said, how are we going to do an adaptation if we don't know what the damn movie's about? So we couldn't get any reference. We couldn't get anything. And so Goodwin and Simon said, what are we going to do? Well, so Walt, they had an office, whichever movie company made it, they had an office in New York. Walt went to their office with a sketch pad. And he said, look, I'm doing the adaptation for Marvel. I need to know what the stuff looks like. I need to, And so they showed him some stills. They wouldn't let him take the stills. They let him do little sketches of the stills. So he goes home. 5 minutes later, a person from the studio is knocking on the door saying, you have to give us those sketches. And he took the sketches. And Walt, he didn't want to get Marvel in trouble, so he gave him the sketches. The first time that Goodwin and Walt Simonson knew what was in that movie was when they paid to go see it on the day it opened. Okay? I would have reimbursed them, but they didn't ask me. But up until then, they didn't know. So now we're starting basically 5 months late. Because then they could give us the script and stills and stuff. And so now they're starting to work. And by the time that book came out, nobody even cared about that movie anymore.
Yeah.
We had all these nightmares and all this stupid stuff. I mean, we did Dragon Slayer, rubber dragon flapping around on the screen. It was a lot of that stuff. Same with Hasbro. G.I. Joe worked. Now they want me to do Sectars. They want me to do, Star Ears. And a lot of it was, I couldn't fend it off. You should see what I fended off. I mean, holy cow.
The Star Ears didn't do that well then?
No, none of it. It has to be a super toy. It has to be just like Star Wars. You have to have a super movie. Star Wars worked. Raiders worked. If it ain't that big, it's not going to happen.
Yeah, Raiders of the Lost Ark. Okay.
Yeah, that was good. And G.I. Joe worked at the super toy. The Transformers worked at the super toy. Swept the nation. But, was Crystar going to work? No.
Crystar, right. Exactly. Yeah, it's a kind of a beta one.
And so I did my best. I had John Romita Jr. design stuff. But, some of this stuff, you're just not going to win that fight.
So a lot of that was driven by the upstairs guys, actually.
Yeah, who had never opened a comic book and couldn't care less and thought Landed Kingdom of the Spiders had something to do with Spider-Man.
And basically making like movie licensing toy deals. I gotcha. And then tell us about how Battlestar Galactica came out by Mackenzie and Simonson, and did that do well? It's 23 issues from 79 to 81.
Battlestar Galactica went better than most. It did okay. It didn't do gangbusters, but it did fine, and quickly ran its course. I mean, the TV show was on for a while. Sales started declining. I think they canceled the TV show, and we probably made some money on it, at least at the beginning. And I don't think we ever lost money on it, but it was, more trouble than it was worth.
So in your mind, you kind of were already thinking, fine, we'll do it, but there's no way it's going to be another Star Wars.
Oh, I knew that. I mean, yeah, I knew that about almost everything. I can't, I'm trying to think of one that surprised me. I can't. I mean, I like the two super movies, I was not at all surprised.
Yeah.
When Raiders did well, or when Star Wars was once I saw it and I knew what it was, I said, wow, this is gonna rock the world.
What about Godzilla? That went from 77 to 79. Herb Trimpe, Doug Mensch worked on that.
Yeah.
Tell us about that, and then did that sell well?
Shogun Warriors, Godzilla, might have been something else. I don't know. They did okay. They were pretty middle of the road. ROM did fine. ROM did fine on the basis of the fact it was a good book.
Yeah.
And it had nothing to do with the toy. And I think that Herb did a great job, and Doug did some of his best stuff on those books. And they did pretty well. They weren't, the X-Men.
You cluster Godzilla and Shogun Warriors as one thing.
Right. They weren't the same company, but they were sort of a kind. They had I think the same people bought them.
I gotcha.
And
because Mensch and Trimpe also did Shogun Warriors also.
Yeah,
like
right.
with Godzilla.
Yeah, and so I don't remember exactly how we got them. I think it was one of those deals where I think actually one of those was Joe Calamari. He had come in after he was done being a hatchet man. They needed a place to put him, so they fired Alice Donnerfeld, who was the greatest thing that ever happened in that joint, and they gave him her job. She went to Filmation. She was fine, but it's all of a sudden he's there, and he's the business affairs executive vice president in charge of business affairs. I didn't technically report to him, but I think he outranked me. And so he was kind of making deals with this stuff, and some of that stuff was just him all by himself, And one of them, I think it was Shogun Warriors. This guy shows up in our office. He says, "You licensed this from, I don't know, whoever it was, Toei or somebody." He said, "They don't own it. I do." Happened with Ron too, same thing. Some guy turns up and says, "They don't own that. I do." And we found out that he was right. So we had to start paying him.
The one thing I want to know about, curious about Shogun Warriors, because it also comes along with the Japanese toy theme. Giant robot toys from Japan. Some people thought of them as like precursors to Transformers. The toy line ended in 1980. There were some safety sales issues, but I heard that the name Megatron came from Shogun Warriors. Was there like a Marvel, like Japanese business connection forming at this point?
We had an agent who represented us in Japan. I think his name was Gene Pelk. Good guy. And he actually licensed SpiderMan to Japan. But because the books read backwards and the style is so much different over there, their license allowed them to create their own comics rather than try to reformat ours. They made Spider-Man into a giant robot. Okay, giant robots are popular there. But no, I don't think none of that stuff had anything to do with
Transformers.
And if the name was the same, it was probably an accident.
I gotcha. So then tell us about Micronauts. Now Microman 1974, licensed by Mego in 76, and there was a Micronaut toy line until 1980, but it was a Marvel comic in 79, and it lasted like 8 years or 7 years to 1986. And Mantlo worked on that, and Michael Golden did some issues in the beginning. Tell us about how Micronauts came about, and what kind of success would you consider that?
Well, it was 1978. I was in my first year as editor-in-chief, and I get a call from this guy. He says his name is Stan Weston. Didn't mean anything to me. And he said he worked he licensed Mego stuff, and he had this property. He thought maybe we'd be interested in licensing it for a comic. I said, "Well, what is it?" It's Micronauts. I said, "Well, I don't know. I've never heard of it." He said, "I'll send you a set." So he sent me a box of toys, right? So the toys all over my desk. And then like the next day or something, Bill Mantlo was in the office, and he comes running into me. He says, "I just got my kid the greatest toy." He says, "This wonderful stuff. It's called Micronauts." I said, "Bill, look what's on my desk." And he said, "Oh, we got to do this. It's great." And, I said, "You really think you can do something with this?" Yeah, absolutely. I said, "All right, okay." So I can't remember which editor took charge of it, and they got Michael Golden. That doesn't hurt. And Bill did some of the best work he ever did, and I think he even created some characters for them and stuff. And I probably got a little bump from the toy, but it mostly succeeded on its merits, and it was pretty good for a long time. But that was, I think, it was all Bill. Maybe it was some help from his editor. I didn't contribute much to that except say yes. And Michael Golden, of course, always did a great job.
Mm-hmm. So
by the way, Stan Weston is a legend in the toy and licensing business. He is the man who created the first G.I. Joe, the big dolls.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that's him. And
Stan Weston.
Yeah, he was tremendously successful at licensing. And, you say Stan Weston to toy people, they're oh, Stan Weston. It's like Bernie Loomis. Nobody knows who Bernie Loomis is, but he's the Care Bears guy and the Star Wars guy, toys. And, he's a legend, too. Worked with both of them. It was great.
Ah, that's awesome. Yeah, because the toy business, that's a whole nother history right there. So then now Rom was a toy created by Parker Brothers within Hasbro. And Bill Mantlo did a lot of work on Rom. And there's a lot of celebrated art by Sal Buscema and later Steve Ditko. Also similar time, 79 to 86, just like Micronauts. How did Rom come about? And why do you think it did well, and why did it end?
Well, first of all, it was Parker Brothers before they were bought by Hasbro. All right. And that was one of those deals where I get a call to come upstairs. The president has this ROM toy sitting on his desk. He says, "What do you think of this?" "Well, I don't know. Looks okay." He said, "Look," he says, "it makes noises and the lights flash, I said, "Oh, cool. And he says, "I think we should license this and do a comic book." And I said, "Well, I said, I guess." He said, "Could you do something with this?" I said, "Well, yeah, I guess so. It depends on how free a hand I have. I guess we could do something." And he said, we're going to get on a plane tomorrow. We're going to fly up to Boston, get a car, go out to Parker Brothers and meet with them. So he already had this figured out, So we did that. We take the shuttle up to Boston and get a car and drive out to Parker Brothers. Parker Brothers had this great building in this wooded area. It was beautiful. Inside it was all just cubicles, but the outside was great. And so we met with some people there, and Golden had already decided he was doing this. So, okay, fine. So we get the license and come back, and I wrote kind of the foundation story. I didn't flesh it out a whole lot. But I wrote the basic story, and then I gave it to Bill. Bill did build on what I did. I mean, as I said in some other interview once, he named the lead girl Brandy. That's a Bill name. That's not I wouldn't do that. There's nothing wrong with the name, but it's something he would think of and I wouldn't. Jean DeWolf. I don't know. So those are Bill names I probably wouldn't have come up with. So he did a lot to develop it, and then once again he did a good job, a really good job on it, and we did have good art, and it far outlasted the toy, so it was succeeding on its own merits, and I liked it. I thought it was well done. I was happy to see Bill using his talent. And he did a great job, and so he built a lot of good things. He created Rocket Raccoon, for instance.
Right.
And he was always good at creating characters. He was like a machine gun, firing out characters. I had some issues with him because he had done some hacking and still occasionally did. And he plagiarized a couple times. And once got us in really big trouble because he plagiarized a Harlan Ellison story. Don't plagiarize Harlan Ellison. And it got through because I didn't recognize the story. I never read or seen what Harlan had done. And So there was that. I mean, one of my first.
Is that the deal where like then you called Harlan and like you came up with some deal where you'd give him free Marvel comics forever or something like that?
Yeah, that was when he called me, I just found out from Roger Stern. He said this was word for word from a Harlan Ellison TV show. I said, oh. So then the phone rings and it's Harlan, and he says, "You guys ripped me off." And I said, "Yep." He said, "What?" He said, "You admit it?" I said, "Yeah." I said, "Roger Stern just told." I said, "I don't know. I never saw this thing." I said, "But Roger Stern told me, and if Roger says so, it's true." And so then it was like, oh, he thought I was going to fight with him or something. And then I said, "No, you're right. Why don't you get your lawyer? I'll get our lawyers to call yours. Or you get your lawyers to call ours. They'll work something out." And he said, "No, we can do it." Okay. So what he wanted exactly the same pay that Mantlo got for writing it. He wanted an apology. I said, fine. And he said he wanted a lifetime subscription to everything Marvel ever published. I said, done. So we settled it right there. And he was very generous with us because the statutory penalty for that would have been something like $750,000.
Yeah. Yeah, 750,000 at that in the 1980s. Yeah. Did you have any other interactions with Harlan Ellison?
He'd be around once in a while. He did a story with Denny once. It was all reasonably okay. He was kind of a character. I mean, like you go to a restaurant, like a diner or something like that, and you take out a roll of quarters, and you put it on the table. And every time the waiter did something wrong, you knock a quarter off. And whatever was left, it was a tip.
What a jerk.
I was saying, like, that's kind of tacky. Come on, And then what happened was he did a Comics Journal interview condemning Michael Fleischer mostly for his work on the Spectre. And he called him bug fuck and nuts and all this. Yeah. And so Fleischer sued him, right? And at first he got a lot of support. Somebody, I think Mantlo, threw a party and had lots of people there, Walt, Louise, and everybody. And everybody was very supportive. Ernie Colon donated a painting to help him raise money. But when it came to testifying against the Comics Journal, no one wanted to do that. And so his lawyer came to me, not a great lawyer. I thought he wanted me to be an expert witness. And all I was supposed to say was that Harlan Ellison was well-known and influential. I can say that, sure. But so I go and I testify to that. But this lawyer was not very good. And so the opposing lawyer started treating me like a fact witness and asking me all kinds of questions, which had nothing to do with my opinion about Harlan. And, what convention did you go to in 1979 in July? I don't know. It's like, so that was long and stupid. And the thing is, what had happened is in the meantime, I'd introduced the royalty plan. And so Fleischer's claim was that he was damaged by Harlan, which he was. But because of the royalties and stuff, he was actually making more money than he used to. So he won the case.
Fleischer did, yeah.
But the jury only awarded him $1 because they didn't see damages.
Financial damages, because he actually made more money.
He was better off financially than he used to be. So how can he claim that he was destroyed? So whatever. I mean, I just tried to do the right thing, and as a result of that, Harlan just hated me after that. I'd see him once in a while, and he was at least cordial, but he was I don't know. He was an unusual man. I at the Marvel 25th anniversary party at the Grant Hotel in San Diego, hundreds and hundreds, thousands of people, I guess, were there. Among them, Harlan, right? And I'm the editor-in-chief. I'm being sociable, trying to talk to people and stuff like that. And this young lady asked me, would I dance with her? Okay, so we're dancing, And she told me, she says, I'm actually here with Harlan. He wanted me to spy on you and ask you questions and stuff. And I said well, he come over and ask me himself. I said, I'll talk to him. I don't care. And so, I mean, like, that was weird. That's strange.
Yeah. He has an anger. I think that's what he's known. He's known for. That's one of the things he's known for.
He's known for, sending people dead woodchucks and things.
You mentioned Super Toy. Tell us about first hiring Larry Hama, meeting him, and then starting off. And then how did G.I. Joe get started? The Hasbro line.
Well, when DC imploded, this is in summer of 1978. Suddenly, a lot of people became available. Not Denny. Denny, his contract had turned. I don't remember, but somebody there knew him. I think maybe Milgram knew him because they both worked at DC. Okay, so Larry became available, and about that same time, Warren died, so Louise was available, and so somebody highly recommended Larry. I talked to him once. The guy was super smart and really knew his stuff. So we hired him, and for a while he was doing Crazy Magazine, Black and Whites, a lot of that stuff. Then he was doing some comics. We ended up killing some of the Black and Whites, and he was doing some comics. Okay, so then Jim Golden, president of the company, he was at some charity function, and you literally in the men's room met Hassenfeld from Hasbro, and anyway, I guess they were washing their hands and they started talking there, and they kept talking, and so Hassenfeld was telling Golden all about what Hasbro was doing, and Golden was telling him about what he knew about comics. And Hassenfeld said that one of the things they were doing was they were trying to revive some of the old brands, and among them was G.I. Joe. And he said, but they didn't really know what they were going to do yet with it. And Galton said, this is what he quoted to me, he quoted himself. He said, I told him we got nothing but geniuses. You should let us do it. And so a meeting was arranged. It was me, Galton. It was at a lawyer's office downtown someplace, or down in the Battery area. It was me and Galton, and then a few executives from Hasbro. I think a marketing guy was there. And they had a one slideshow. They had this slide up on the wall. It was a picture of a photo of a soldier and the G.I. Joe logo. G.I. Joe, a real American hero. That's all they had. They had nothing else. And they didn't even know what size they were going to do. They said, we don't think the big dolls are a good idea anymore. And I said, we got to do the Star Wars size. Because I was a little boy once, and I know if it's the same size, Star Wars and G.I. Joe, boys will have the Star Wars guys fighting the G.I. Joes. It's a boy thing. I said, you got to do the Star Wars size. That's the most popular. And it's 3 3/4 inches, something.
So you've actually suggested the size of the toy.
Yes. And then the other thing, one of the executives says, we want to do a whole line of toys. He said, what are we going to do? G.I. Joe, G.I. Fred, G.I. Steve, G.I. George? I said, no, it's me. I said, that's the name of the unit, okay? And you can't do war, okay? That won't go. I said, but you could do anti-terrorism. So what if it's a top secret unit and they're carefully selected, the best sailors, the best soldiers, the best airmen, the best Marines, super secret. When there's a terrorist crisis, you call in G.I. Joe. Yeah, so they like that, and they like the slogan. They like the slogan and everything. And then the guy says, he said, well, we want to do comics, animation, toys, and licensing. He said, we need like a story. We need a story for the comics and the animation. I said, well, I can do that. We'll do that. And they said, well, when can we have it? I said, we'll get it to you in a few days. And so I went back to the office, walked right into Larry's office. He doesn't remember this, but I do. Walked into Larry's office because ex-military, explosive ordnance expert.
Right.
A war historian, by the way. People don't know that. This guy can tell you about Thermopylae all day. So I walk into his office and I said, this is what I got going with Hasbro. What do you think? And he said, well, I've been working on, I knew this too, he'd been working on something called the Fury Force, which was a revival of Sergeant Fury and his Howling Commandos as an anti-terrorist group.
Larry Hama was?
Yeah. And he told me about it. And he had already cooked up stuff like having the secret headquarters under the chapel and all that stuff. And he said, can I use what I've been working on for this? And I said, Joe, yes, absolutely, if you want.
So Cobra was basically Hydra then, right?
No. The way Cobra came about was Larry started working with Hasbro. We both did, so he was creating stuff for them. He wrote the story line. I asked him to write the story. He wrote it, and I got it, and it was just the facts. It was nothing wrong with the story, but it was not dramatic, and so I rewrote it to dramatize it. Didn't change anything. Just a little more, melodrama, because toy guys like that. So anyway, Hasbro loved it, and then Larry and I started working with them. Almost all Larry. I don't think I said 2 words. He was doing everything. He was creating characters, talking about weapons and toys and things. So finally, they get to the point where they're getting ready to launch. And they had prototypes and stuff, and they asked us to come up to Pawtucket to see what their launch was going to be. So by that time, Mike Hobson was working with us, and so I wanted him along because he, had gravitas and dignity and stuff. And I asked Archie Goodwin to come with us because he's the smartest guy in the world, and Larry and me. I don't know if it was anybody else, whatever. Anyway, so we go, and we're sitting around this conference table, and they trot out all of these toy prototypes, and they're explaining this one. A lot of them were Larry's characters, Larry's ideas, and Archie Goodwin is looking at them. He says, "You don't have any bad guys. You don't have any villains." And they said, "No, villains don't sell. We don't do bad guys. Villains don't sell." And Archie says, "Who are they going to fight?" Right? And Larry and I are looking. He's right. And so we started arguing. The 3 of us started arguing with them that they had to have a villain, right? And the guy finally caves in. He said, "We'll have one bad guy toy." Okay. He said, what do you want? And Archie, off the top of his head, I think, he says, "We're going to call it the Cobra Command. And it's a secret terrorist organization. And they're evil as hell. And there's the Cobra Commander and the Cobra Commandos, and they're bad guys." So the guy says, "All right, well, design us a commando and we'll make one. That's it." So I guess Larry designed it. I have to ask him, but I think he designed it. And sure enough, they had one. Now, the stuff goes on sale, and that was one of their most popular toys. Because if a kid buys like 5 or 6 GI Joes, he wants 5 or 6 bad guys.
Yeah.
So they buy the same toy 6 times. It was one of their top selling toys. And after that, they got the clue. If they did some really interesting bad guys, so each year was about the new bad guys, as well as the new GI Joes. But and Larry was very instrumental in all that. And I even stopped going to the meetings. He didn't need me. I wasn't doing it. I was just, sitting there twiddling my thumbs while he did everything.
And he was doing basically like character Bibles and things like that.
Oh, he did everything. Character Bibles. He created characters. He was in pretty constant contact with them, and he I think he was having the time of his life. I think he loved it. He was having fun, and he sure didn't need my help. The only 2 things I can say that I did rewrite that story to make it more dramatic. Larry, of course, introduced a lot of female characters in the comic book, but Hasbro wasn't making any female character toys. And so I went to one of these meetings, and I got into it with them. I said, "You have to have some female characters. We have them in the comics, and they're, no, they don't sell." I said, "That's what you said about villains." I said, "No." I said, I said, do vehicles sell?" I said, "Yeah." I said, "Make the drivers women, make some of the drivers female characters." And so they tried that, and it worked real well. And then they tried, what was it, Scarlet maybe, or?
Yeah, there's Lady J and Scarlet.
And then there was a bad guy, Baroness maybe?
The Baroness, yeah.
Baroness. Yeah, so anyway, they started trying some toys, and they sold fine. They sold great, because G.I. Joe was so cool. The boys didn't think, "Oh, I'm buying a girl toy." They thought they're buying a G.I. Joe.
Yeah, that's right.
And so the sales were great. And by having some of them be the vehicle drivers, we can get more characters there. And Larry, he ran with it. He'd already been doing it, but he contributed greatly to that too. And that's about it, I guess.
But there was always that understanding that Hasbro would own the rights to all those characters, right? There was always that understanding.
Of course, yeah.
That's a toy deal, yeah. So now anything that goes through the animation cartoon process, obviously that means Stan would know about it. So how did he like G.I. Joe?
Well, Stan didn't know about it. I mean, he knew about G.I. Joe because he would occasionally read the comics. The people at the production studio just basically kept Stan out of it. He had his little office and his secretary, and they didn't consult with him at all. He was not involved. He didn't direct anything. He didn't have any power over everything. His job was to call studio executives and producers, try to sell TV, animation, movies, and the studio people did not respect him. The first guy was David the Patty, and he brought in his production guy, Lee Gunther, and they didn't want anything to do with Stan. You know, they hated the comics. So the first logo for Marvel Productions, you couldn't tell it has anything to do with Marvel. It's like an MP, I think, you know, and no, nothing else. And they didn't like us at all, you know, and they hated the comics. I know that from hearing it personally. What happened was, eventually, they got rid of the Patey, or his contract came to the end. I'm not sure. And they hired this lady, Margaret Lesh. Margaret Lesh worked briefly in New York, out of our office in the licensing area. Then she became the studio chief for Marvel Productions. Immediately, she has a sculpture of Spider-Man crawling up the outside wall of the building. Changed the stationery, changed the logo so it had Spider-Man on it. She was proud of Marvel. She liked Marvel. And one time when I was out in LA and there were with some editors, I don't remember, I think maybe Larry, I don't know. But anyway, we were out there and Transformers, I actually wrote the foundation story for that. That's me. So I was out there and Margaret wanted to have a meeting with me and whoever I brought, and Lee Gunther, who was now running pretty much all of the operations. You know, Margaret was in charge, but he was like Sol Brodsky. So she asked him to come to the meeting, and at first he didn't come, and I think then she called him and said, "Where are you?" You know, and so he finally comes into the meeting. He's all disgruntled, like he's wasting his time on those comic book people, you know. And so, you know, I said, Margaret and I have been talking about, you know, maybe we could coordinate more, you know, like have the comics and the animation have a closer relationship. He says, "No, we hate your comics. They're stupid. They're ugly." He says, "We don't want anything to do with you." And I said, "Lee, I'm the guy who created the Transformers story." He said, "No, you didn't." I said, "What do you mean I didn't?" He said, "Sunbow created that." I said, "Sunbow." I said, "I'll tell you what Sunbow did. They took my treatment, took my cover page off, and put theirs on." I said, "That's what Sunbow did. That was typed on my secretary's typewriter. Some of the characters are named after relatives of mine. You know, I'm sorry. That's me. I did. No, you didn't. You know." I said, "I don't think we're getting anywhere here, Mark." So he goes storming off, you know, to get away from us ugly, horrible comic book people. And the animation studio did a pretty good job. Okay. But they didn't want anything to do with us, and they wouldn't even acknowledge that we created it. I think they couldn't argue too much about G.I. Joe because Larry was so entrenched with Hasbro. But Transformers, they thought that was Sunbow, you know. Yeah, Anyway.
Interesting. But they still had to look at some of the character stuff that came from the comics to some degree, right, for the cartoons?
Well, now see, there was an advertising agency. The name I'm not going to remember right away. I'll think of it later. Tom, somebody, and I'll think of it in a moment. Hasbro had this advertising agency in Manhattan. And when we did G.I. Joe with Hasbro, and Hasbro was working with us directly, that drove them crazy because they wanted to be between us. They wanted to be not only do advertising, they wanted to do all the marketing for Hasbro. And can't remember the name of it. I'll think of it. The two men's names. And so they, one of them had been like college roommates, sold cronies with Hassenfeld. And so there was kind of a buddy crony thing going on there. And they kept trying to wedge their way in between Marvel and Hasbro. When Transformers started, a Hasbro guy, Bob Prupus, came to me, sat in my office, showed me the car that turned into a robot, and I ended up writing the backstory for that. But somewhere shortly into it, this advertising agency succeeded in driving a wedge. They also created Sunbow, which was an executive production facility, just to be between us and Hasbro. And so a lot of things had to go through them, less contact directly with Hasbro. They wouldn't stop talking to Larry, I'll tell you. And they did talk to Bob Budiansky a lot and stuff. I mean, they went around. Hasbro made a show of like making them involved, but when they needed to talk to me or talk to Bob Budiansky, somebody, they just called us up. I mean, they weren't going to play that game. But for as far as the studio knew, it was all coming from Sunbow. And I think Sunbow, Roger Schleifer worked there for a while. So he at least knew the comics and he knew what was really going on because he had worked on them.
You mentioned that the animation people, that Stan had his office there, that they really didn't consult him much. So that means like Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends and the Spider-Man cartoon of 1980, Defenders of the Earth. A lot of that really was, although he had some peripheral stuff like voiceover or something, or writing some, like the song for Defenders of the Earth. You're saying he wasn't really that directly involved with much of that process.
Not at all. He was the guy who sold it. Who would not take Stan Lee's call? If I called up a studio chief, for the Paramount or something like that, they're going to take my call? Hell no. But if Stan called him, sure. So he was involved in the sales part of it. Very, very little in the creative at all. They had a guy named Dennis Marks who was sort of the head of creative. He didn't care to talk to Stan. So anyway, the Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends. I was out in L.A. for some reason. I went to Stan's office just to hang out for a little bit and say hello. And he said, "Oh, I'm going to do a pitch to one of the networks." I don't remember which one, whichever one Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends were on. He said, "I'm going to do a pitch. You want to come with me?" I said, "Sure, okay." So we go together, and we did the pitch together. And he congratulated me after. He says he really contributed some stuff there. It was really good. And I said, "Well, thanks, Stan." He said, "I think you know what you're doing." I said, "Well, I hope so." I even got a letter from him once. He said dealing with Hollywood was driving him crazy. He says he really likes talking to me because at least there's someone who knows what he's doing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have that letter in my show and tell stuff. But anyway, so we sold it. And then so it was on the air. And he didn't really have much to do with it after we sold it.
Seemed like the pairing of Iceman and Spider-Man just seemed, I mean, looking back, it's kind of strange, isn't it?
Yeah, weren't thrilled with that. I mean, they decided they wanted a cute dog and they wanted a couple characters. I think that was mostly negotiated between them and Dennis Marks or whoever was in his job at the time. But we didn't. Stan, that wasn't his idea. I mean, what was it, Ms. Lion or something? Some stupid dog.
Well, no, but I don't remember that. But then also Firestar was created for that show, and then she ended up coming to the comics later on. Right. And was that really a product of, like, who created Firestar exactly?
I think the studio people did, but it was a cipher character, and I think when I think Chris wrote it or somebody, we had some good people working on it, and they fleshed it out.
Chris who?
Claremont.
Oh, that's cool. Oh, I didn't know that. So the Transformers, now that's around 1984. And again, you mentioned, so first, how did the deal come about to start doing the Transformers? And then I know that you actually wrote, and you had mentioned this earlier, the initial treatment.
Yep.
Did you come up with, so the concept of Decepticons versus Autobots, did you create that?
Okay, here's what happened. I was sitting at my little desk, and in comes this guy from Hasbro, Bob Prupus, and he puts this car on my desk. I said, "Oh, that's cool." He says, watch this. Flip, 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 flip. It's a robot. Flip, 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 flip. It's a car. I said, why does it do that? He said, that's what we're here to find out. They had licensed the technology from Japan.
Yeah.
All right. The Japanese didn't really have much of a story. I mean, apparently Japanese kids' car turns into a robot. That makes sense. That's fine. And nobody asked why. It just was cool that it did it. And then that was that. They didn't have to explain it in Japan. Hasbro felt that the American market probably want to know why. They like the story to be more fleshed out. So okay, so he said, can you work with this? And he showed me what else they had. They had Autobots and Decepticons, the names.
Okay, they had that already.
Yes, and they had Transformers more than meets the eye, but nothing really else. That's it, And then, of course, they had the toys. They didn't have names. They didn't have American names or anything. And so okay, I asked Denny to write it, and he took a try at it. It was a very half-hearted attempt, and it was terrible. And I fed him his lines. I said, Denny, how about this? How about that? And he didn't care about it. He didn't like toys. The reason he took the job was because it paid well, and so he turned in this thing, and I said it was terrible.
Now, is it true he came up with the name Optimus Prime?
It is absolutely true.
That is true.
But the thing is, this treatment is dumb. I mean, the parts that I gave him I thought were all right, but so I paid him. I said, okay, voucher it, So having spent my budget, I didn't have any money to pay anybody else. I could have drummed some up, but I thought, no, I'll just do it. So I did it, and I wrote the treatment, and Hasbro loved it. They thought it was great.
What was that initial plot that you put together?
It was the origin story. It was the planet Cybertron, and there's a war, and Cybertron is entirely metal. It's all the resources have been stripped, and everything is robotic and so forth.
Oh, okay. You came up with that.
Oh yeah, that's me.
So then, did you come up with the name Cybertron?
Yeah.
You made Cybertron. That's awesome.
And so some of the good guys flee to Earth, and the bad guys pursue. Of course, Earth is rich with minerals and so forth. So the bad guys have some evil plans for Earth. The Autobots are trying to defend it. I don't remember it in tremendous detail, but it was basically the sort of the foundation story. It was the kid. What was his name? They call him Spike. No, we call him Spike, I think.
Oh, the kid, the teenager of the story.
Yeah, and they call him.
He's like a Rick Jones kind of guy.
Yeah, and they called him something else in the cartoon because they thought Spike was too scary. But I saw all those basic characters. That's all me, and then the basic story of the first issue, the origin story, wasn't really the first issue. It was all the stuff you needed to know to write the first issue. So anyway, then they liked that, and they wanted it out at a certain date, and so I went to Bob Budiansky, who's really good guy, smart guy, can draw. He's he can write. He's sort of a Larry Hama. And I asked him, and I said, but you'd have to write this plot over the weekend for the first issue. He took it. He did it. It was fine. And then he became the Larry Hama of Transformers. He was creating all the characters. They give him a toy. He'd say, I'm going to call it Bumblebee because it's yellow. And,
yeah, he came up with names like Bumblebee. Yeah.
Yeah. The only one that he didn't was Optimus Prime. That was Denny. And
you came up with Cybertron.
Yeah, that was all the origin stuff. That's me.
That's awesome.
The characters' names, I can't remember their names, but yeah, that was all. I did the foundation. Bob took it from there. So I built him a pretty good foundation, but he just took it and ran. He was creating characters. He was Circuit Breaker, I think. He did so much stuff. So good.
So then I noticed it's like cars fighting planes, right? Isn't that kind of like part of that? Who came up with that split?
Well, they had the toys that were airplanes that turned into robots, and so Bob had to figure out a way to incorporate them in what he was doing in the comic book, and he did, and it came out fine.
I see. So making the planes the bad guys and the cars tended to be the good guys, statistically, that was probably more Bob like putting more issues in and getting more characters in.
Yeah, that was, and of course we'd get input from Hasbro, and it was just like with Larry. They didn't need me at the meetings. Bob knew what he was doing, and I pretty much left him alone.
That's cool. Yeah, you kind of set it to that direction, and there it went.
Yeah, well, I was good at writing the pitch piece, the foundation piece for the toy companies, because I got to know these toy guys, and I'm telling you, they love football cliches, and he would not be denied and stuff like that. I mean, they want the melodrama, because I think they try to think like kids, so you show them where the melodrama is, and they liked it, and it was not only melodrama, it was real drama, but I mean, you play it up a little bit for the toy guys, and so it worked out pretty well, and I think I was good at doing the foundation work, and those guys, Bob and Larry, just unbelievable work they did. It was great.
So now, and I wanted to get one little detail out. So when Stan left for Los Angeles, what was his job title at Marvel exactly? Because it wasn't publisher, was it? It was something else.
It was publisher. But the thing is,
it was publisher. Okay.
Well, Sam called himself editor when he was doing the books in the 60s.
Yeah.
Right. Company was bought by Perfect Chemical Incorporated in 1968. Okay. As soon as they bought Marvel, they changed their name to Cadence Industries. And because that was the era where conglomerates were all the rage, like Litton Industries, for instance, all these big companies buying up all little companies that were totally unrelated, so they were building this little conglomerate. So at first, Stan stayed where he was, but there was Martin Goodman had negotiated this deal where after he was required to stay for a couple of years, I think, and then he had arranged for his son to take his place as president of the company.
Right.
Stan thought, hell no, I'm not working for Martin's son. I'm not working for Chip. And he actually was going to quit. He went to DC and actually negotiated a deal with DC, and he was going to revolutionize the whole place. He was going to change the name. He's DC Comics, Detective Comics. That's stupid. He said, I was going to call it Super Comics or Superman Comics if I couldn't use Super. And he said it was going to change everything, and he was already working on it. He was already figuring it out and had a great deal with DC. And, I guess they wised up upstairs, the board. And so what they did is they reneged on the making Chip president thing. And I guess paid Stan a bunch of money, and they made him president of the company. So he was the president of the company for a little while. Up until then, including being president, he still had some direct contact with the comics. Like Roy never had the free hand I had. I had Stan's old job, but Roy always had Stan over him. So anyway, so he was president for a while. He hated it. I mean, he's not a business guy. He doesn't like it. It's just no fun. He wanted to do creative stuff. So they worked something out. They called him publisher. And for a few years, he was getting a lot of play in the lecture circuit. And also, he kept his office upstairs. We were on the 6th floor, and the upstairs was where the executives were. They were on the 9th floor. And so what was upstairs? All the chief executive guys, Galton and the people like that, licensing. The circulation guy was up there. The subscription department. It was all this other stuff that wasn't real closely allied with the comics. All the comic stuff was downstairs. So Stan was upstairs because upstairs published magazines. They had the Magazine Management Incorporated, which was part of Marvel, but it stood alone. And so Stan was called publisher, and he really kind of took charge of those magazines. They were crappy magazines. They were soap opera magazines, the men's sweat magazines. That's a technical term. It's kind of grody men's magazines. Crossword puzzle books, kind of miscellaneous stuff. And he was trying to make something out of that. And that was not good, right? So he wasn't winning that, and he didn't like it up there, and he didn't like being publisher and so forth. So what he did was he took his office back down on the 6th floor. Now, at that point, he had nothing to do with the comics. He wasn't on the organizational chart. His job was to be Stan. And even before I got there, his job was trying to sell animation, trying to sell any kind of media, movies, TV. He made a record deal. There was a SpiderMan record one time, and musical record. So anyway, he was busy with that kind of stuff, and but he's Stan Lee, and he's 30 feet away. If I got a question, I'm going to go ask Stan. So we talked a lot, and he helped me a lot, and I learned a lot.
So then when he left in 1980, he still carried the name publisher in name, basically, right?
Yeah, he did. Yeah, I think it was a good calling card name for when he called up studios and stuff,
And that went on for a while, right? For like 20-something years, I think, after that even.
I think so. I mean, like it was an honorary title.
It was an honorary publisher, but he would say publisher in conversation, maybe.
Right, of course. Yeah, because that was a good thing if you're talking to the studio chief.
And for sales, that makes sense.
Yeah. But that's so he never did that. He wasn't that business guy. He just his eyes are glazed over. He's like Archie. Just
didn't like that part of it. So Star Comics, so you mentioned that that was aimed at children. It started in 84, ended in 1988. And I know that when I spoke to DeFalco about it, one of the main concerns was Harvey Comics was going out of business, so kids wouldn't have a gateway into reading comics. Tell us about what you were doing with Star Comics, how it came about.
Well, it had nothing to do with Harvey, and they weren't a gateway anyway. That's baloney. But what happened was we were doing gangbusters with the regular comics. Epic was doing well. And the only thing we kind of didn't have was a young kids line. A couple of forces at play. One was that when I first took the job, the president of the company told me he wanted us to get out of the comic book business, and he was going to get us into animation and children's books. I said, "You're wrong. We're going to make this big." And he said, "Baloney." I said, "He's just don't lose money. Do anything you want." Okay, it's pretty free hand. So we didn't lose money. We made money. We were propping up the whole place, the whole corporation, and so we're on a roll, and we didn't do kids comics, but we got involved with a company called TCFC, and they were the creators, along with Bernie Loomis, of the Care Bears, among other things, Strawberry Shortcake, Holly Hobby, all kinds of stuff. So that got me thinking. Galton had starting up this children's book thing he always wanted to do, largely because of money I made for him. But he was starting that up, and that's why he hired Hobson, because he wanted Hobson to be the publisher of that. And wasn't really he was of counsel to me, but he wasn't really he was never intended to be the publisher of the comics. So that was kind of getting going, and one thing they found out is that it was really difficult. The whole idea of starting up a comic book, a children's book publishing company, to compete in the mass market when you're little, like Marvel is stupid, because Western owns all the racks. What they don't own, Random House owns, and you can't get distribution. You'll get book jobbers to get you into little tiny stores. So maybe that's about it. That's why you needed a couple $100 million just to sit down at that table to make the ante. And we're doing it on a shoestring, right? And it just was a dumb idea. It really was. Around Cadence, it was known as, quote, Galton's Folly, the children's book line. And then later, the production studio, too. It was called Galton's Folly.
I see.
And so now he's trying to compete with Random House and Western, who own the racks. And he's trying to do mass market stuff. His idea was license things, but who if you had a great property, wouldn't you go to Western or Random House and get a bigger advance and everything? and distribution and so forth. So having a great deal of difficulty getting anything. So I got to know the Henson people pretty well because we did Spidey Super Stories and we did a strip for Electric Company magazine. I knew them pretty well. I saw Jim Henson a number of times. He gave me a personal tour of the Muppet Factory. He liked us. He liked me. And the other contact I had was I got to know the guys at TCFC. We wanted to do some stuff with them. They got to know. They actually, the way that started was they had always done girls' toys, and they wanted to do a boys' toy. And they thought, hey, Marvel Comics, they must know what they're doing, right? So they got in touch with us, and we were talking about that. We were talking about a lot of things. They also liked me. And so when they could, they licensed things like Care Bears and Strawberry Shortcake. So when they could have gone anywhere and got a much better deal, they came to us because two things. They liked us, and you get a comic book with it. You get a children's book and a comic book. Now, some of the children's book rights were tied up, so we did the comics without the children's book. But that was the idea was. You can sell people who wouldn't otherwise want to do it by saying, oh, and we can do a comic book too. So because of our relationship with Henson and because of our relationship with TCFC, we had some properties, right, for comics, which we eventually hoped to get the children's book rights. So the comics were doing pretty well. Care Bears was the #1 selling comic book in the UK, and did pretty well for us. Also, the other people who liked us, Mattel. And so, when we were doing that stuff, called up Jill Broad, and, next thing you know, we're doing He-Man. And stuff went pretty well for a while. And, and then...
So you were approached by Mattel to do He-Man comics, is that right?
No, we asked them.
You asked them, yeah, okay.
But they liked us, so they said sure. And
because before, like earlier, a couple years before that, like before the cartoon, they did some comics with DC. Then when the cartoon happened, then you guys did it.
They weren't happy with DC.
I see.
So anyway, we because of relationships, we were able to get some of this stuff, and the idea was eventually we would become the book publishers. So I started the idea of doing this line. One of the triggers was that Harvey went out of business and Sid Jacobson was available. And I said, Sid Jacobson, knew him, really smart guy, really creative, knew all the guys who do that kind of stuff. So we ended up hiring him, and he worked with DeFalco a lot. DeFalco was kind of my assistant, and he really wanted to have a hand in on the children's stuff since he'd come from Archie. He thought he knew all about it. Sid wasn't real thrilled with that, but I refereed. It was fine. Anyway, so we're doing the books, and we're doing pretty good. Then we started getting stuff shoved down our throat again. Puffalumps or something. We did pretty well, and it was going well. And I think we started doing Spider-Ham, which started out as a regular Marvel comic, I believe, and then they wanted to do it as a Star comic.
Yeah, because it was what was it, like Marvel Tales, Tales, and then
there's like a one shot we did.
Yeah,
regular comics,
like the cat.
And that was almost all Larry Hama, by the way. I mean, I guess
so Larry Hama, right?
Talking about doing something like that. Larry was the one who actually executed, or most of it anyway. So anyway, there was some possibilities happening there. I think if I had stayed, I would have done things a lot differently than they did. But maybe would have kept going. But some of it was forced on us. Galton did eventually get one license. He got the Fisher-Price license, which is probably the worst license you could get. Paid a fortune for it. Fisher-Price was super invasive. They wanted everything done a certain way. It was impossible to work with them, and nobody bought the books.
Oh.
And so it was terrible. Marvel Books, after Marvel was bought by well, first they were bought by New World, but then later bought by Perlman. I was talking to his CEO. They were actually considering hiring me as president, and it couldn't work out because if I came back there, I'd be firing a lot of guys. Those executives were useless. And he said, "What would happen on the first day you walk in?" And I said, "Well, some people would drive out the window, some people would run out the door, and I'd fire the rest." He said, "Yeah." He says, "I appreciate your honesty." He said, "We can't start with a bloodbath. We're going to go public." I said, "I understand perfectly. Yes, of course." He said, "But let's stay in touch." Later, he made me an offer, but that didn't work out yet. But at any rate, so I got talking to him, and he said, "Well, what was your business plan for Marvel?" Because I tried to buy it. I said, "Well, we're going to, get rid of the books, liquidate that, take the studio down to a small executive production thing like Sunbow, and not have 100 animators sitting there collecting money and not doing anything." I said, so I think that if you got rid of the books, I said several $1 million would drop the bottom line. He said 6. I said, okay, a little more than I thought. Okay. And I said, and then when you got rid of the studio, I said even more. I said you'd have $10-12 million of money that the comics made that you could use to service your debt. And he said, that's exactly what we're doing. He said we researched this pretty well, and he said it's pretty much our business plan. He said, and we're filtering out those executives. He said we got our guys in one at a time. Bring in Terry Stewart, bring in the new financial guy, one at a time and slowly, so no one notices. I said, okay. So anyway, I said, well, when you get done, call me. And he did. But anyway, yeah, that was the whole thing with the children's books and the animation thing, and both of them were just disasters. It was just tremendously bad judgment. So
now, a little bit on Star Comics. The Warren Kramer also was there for a bit, wasn't he?
Yeah.
Yeah, and so tell me about how was that hiring? Because Harvey went out of business, so what? He needed work? Is that what basically happened?
Yeah, and when Sid, shortly after Harvey went out of business, so we hired Sid. I hired Sid, and of course, then he knew Warren Kramer. He knew Ernie Cologne. Ernie had done some work for us, but he was more comfortable with Casper. And there was another artist whose name I can't remember. This guy who used to do Andro for DC. But he did young kids stuff.
Now there was this question of Royal Roy. You know about that? Yeah. So tell me what there was some issue of maybe it was intended as a copy of Richie Rich. What was your take on that?
Well, when they told me about it, I was suspicious, and Sid says, "No, it's fine." I said, "Okay."
That was Sid's idea. Sid Jacobs' idea.
Yeah, and then. Of course, Harvey rattled their legal sabers at us, and I said, "Okay, that's it." So we got rid of that, changed the name or something. I don't know what, but yeah, I mean, I guess he had a thing for Richie Rich, and got a little too close. It was a bad idea. I should have seen it coming, but I didn't.
Now, is it true? I read like this little excerpt in one random comics journal, and I've never seen or heard of it before or after that. But there was, it wasn't just necessarily, hiring the Harvey guys to come work at Star. I heard that, or I read in that one excerpt that Marvel actually almost bought Harvey Comics. Is that right?
I think at one point we looked into it, but that didn't go very far. I tried to buy Harvey once too, and I got up close and personal, found out why it couldn't be done, which is they didn't have a single piece of paper that proved they owned anything.
Oh,
nothing. And so the guy who bought it, that Montgomery guy out in California, well, it helps if your father owns the chain of banks. And somehow he was able to overcome the legal obstacles. I don't know what he did, but his name was Montgomery, I believe. And then because of him, there were movies. It was Richie Rich, I think Casper, right?
Yeah, the movies, in the 90s.
Spielberg did those. But somehow he cleaned up a chain of title. I can't imagine how he did that. I spent a day at Harvey one time, just, like the wife of the younger Harvey, Leon. I think both brothers were gone at that time. But she let me in and took me to this closet. She says, all the records are in here. And it was like the jumble of papers and crap. And I'm looking through stuff. And I said, do you have, work for hire stuff from all these artists? And no. And the Sad Sack guy actually sued them at one point. And that was, I can't remember what his name was. Whatever. But it was a mess. I really don't know how anybody cleaned that up, but I guess they had enough money to invest to do whatever it took.
Mm-hmm. So then, licensing ThunderCats in 1985 from Rankin Bass. I think Leonard Starr was associated with that project. Do you remember how that came about?
Well, I think that the same way a lot of these other things. Once we were publishing, then people would come to us, and everything, that possibly someday might be a children's book was,
licensed as a comic.
Was enthusiastically received upstairs. Let's put it that way.
Interesting.
And so I would be encouraged to do it, and sometimes had a gun held to my head. I don't remember that ThunderCats in particular. ThunderCats, I think, did pretty well for us, actually.
Yeah, that's interesting, though. But it was all about like pushing almost like a children's publishing kind of.
It was trying to build a little children's publishing empire, and since the books were just a disaster, the theory, I think, upstairs was, well, we'll do the comic books and then we'll segue into the children's books. Didn't work out while I was there.
One of our listeners asked, can you ask Jim Shooter about Avengers 200, the Marcus storyline, and how Chris Claremont continued the story? What was your take on all that? Looking back, what's your take on it now?
I think I must have been asleep that day. I'll tell you, I mean, they put me in as a co-plotter. I don't remember co-plotting it. I mean, I maybe I made some suggestions or something. I don't know. But that storyline, I get more heat about that because I guess there's some like a rape thing, or they didn't like the way the female characters were handled.
Yeah, and then also I think like Carol Danvers was kind of brainwashed and then went off with her. The guy that brainwashed her, the Avengers let it happen. Then when she came back, they were like so lackadaisical about what exactly occurred. Yeah.
It was, and also I thought the ending of the story is pretty dumb. You let the bad guy build the weapon to get you with. I look at it now and I think, what was I thinking? Okay. Was I thinking? Did I really look at it? I mean, did I'm pretty damn sure it crossed my desk, but I don't. Maybe I just decide, well, it's Michelini. How bad can it be?
I got you.
That was a mistake, and it's my fault.
It sounds like you don't like it looking back, and that's cool. Toward the end of your run, around 86-ish, Ron Frenz and DeFalco were working on Spider-Man. Did you like what they were doing on Spider-Man at the time?
Especially towards the end of 86, most of 86, actually. You have to understand, the company was being sold, and they were really screwing all of us down in the comics area.
Yeah. So it was almost like there wasn't really like you looking much at the actual comics at the time.
I was going to LA a lot. They were sending me all over the world. I kept being sent to the UK to train the staff there. Of course, I did the book fairs because they needed me, because none of these executives knew which characters we had. Our international licensing lady made a deal for Wonder Woman once. Nice, Gil. We don't own Wonder Woman. Anyway, I mean, I was spending less and less time there, and also I was being undercut because they were trying to sell the company. They were screwing up my people. They were taking away programs. They took away the health insurance. Or if it wasn't out of town, I was upstairs fighting at the top of my lungs with these idiots. And then toward the end, I mean, I was walking around my floor. All these people work for me, except I've never seen that guy before. Who's he? I asked somebody, I said, who are you? What are you doing here? He said, I'm the editor of such and such. I didn't hire him. They were just cutting me out. They were edging me out as fast as they could. As soon as they thought they had somebody who could replace me, they got rid of me. Okay. whatever. I was glad to go at that point. But so what the question is, like, well, what was I doing in 1986? And then the answer is not much.
It was mostly corporate warfare.
Mostly war.
Yeah, corporate war. Okay, so yeah, because I was going to ask about like them and Jim Owsley not getting along, and if you had heard anything about that interaction.
I wasn't never in the office. Owsley, he was started as a high school intern. He's such a smart kid, and I was really impressed. And so after high school, I think he wanted to be an assistant editor. He applied to be an assistant editor, and I'm not sure for whom, but he did work for somebody, and it went really well. And so when an opportunity came up, I hired him as an editor. And he was young, but he was smart. He was good. He was creative. And for a while, he had an assistant named Adam Blaustein. And Adam Blaustein was terrific. When Bob Odiansky was an assistant, he was like that. The trains ran on time. Everything was buttoned up. Everything was, well taken care of. So Blaustein, he did that for Owsley. And Owsley is another one of those guys like Archie. He just doesn't want to deal with schedules and stuff like that. He wants to do creative. So while he had Adam Blaustein, that place ran like a clock. Then after Blaustein left, and he had another guy, I think his name was Lance Tooks. Lance wasn't that kind. He was not a real detail guy, And so the thing started going to hell, and everything was late, and it was really kind of getting bad. I had to fire Jim Owsley. I said, Jim, everything's late. It's all a problem. So I have to let you go. And he said, thank you. It's literally what he says, thank you. I said, but it's like getting a raise, because now you write for us and you make more money. I said, we'll pay you top dollar. I mean, you're going to do fine, but let's get somebody else who makes, who can keep things organized better. And so he was thrilled. He was happy to be let go. I mean, he if I would have asked him to, he would have resigned to spare me having another, tombstone there. But no, he was happy, and he kept working for us. Now, as far as a problem between him and DeFalco and friends, I don't remember much about that. I don't know that I was involved in that too much. I thought that Tom and Ron were a good team.
Yeah. Now, at the end of your run, when you were working on while New Universe was going on, and you were working on it, and you had a vision for this other universe, and Galton had pulled funding for New Universe. What kept you doing it? Was there any part of you tempted to pull the plug because you didn't want it to be less than the best it could be? What kept you doing it, basically?
Orders. When the 25th anniversary was coming up, and I was pressed for an idea of something we could do, and I proposed something, and they didn't like it. And I proposed, okay, let's celebrate the start of a universe. Let's start another one. And they liked that. And I said, good. So we're going to call it the New Universe. And I walked out of that meeting with $250,000 in development money, and also guaranteed royalties, marketing stuff. We were doing great. So we had a lot of money to spend on it, and we wanted to do it right. About 2 weeks later, I get a call from Jim Galton. Says, come upstairs. Okay. Upstairs. He says, this budget you have, how much have you spent? I said, I don't know, maybe 10,000 or something like that. He said, don't spend another penny. I don't want to spend a nickel on this thing. I said, you mean you don't want us to do it? And he said, oh, no, you just have to do it on staff. So it took away all my budget. And now I'm doing it with volunteers. If you look at the credits on the New Universe books, it's me, Archie Goodwin, and a bunch of assistant editors who were the only guys who would stay after work and work for free for me, to help me. Okay? And so they did pretty good. I mean, I'll tell you, they some of this stuff was pretty good, but it wasn't ready for prime time. Some of it wasn't that good. And also, since we couldn't guarantee royalties, say like if you got Walt Simonson, you say, hey, Walt, I would like you to do this New Universe book. He's doing Thor. He's making a fortune. Okay. Unless I can guarantee him that he's not going to lose any income. So I'll match your royalties on Thor for at least X many months. Unless you can do that, Walt's not going to leave Thor. And no one else is going to leave some book where they're doing really well. So you're not going to get the cream of the crop. So we got a lot of artists who basically they were unemployed that week. There's any guy who couldn't get work, we could get them. We had a couple guys that turned out to be great, Will Sportaccio and Mark Teixeira, for instance, and but they were fairly new at the time, so they weren't superstars yet. So it was an uphill fight, and I would have pulled the plug right away, but Archie was tremendous. He created half the stuff, and he helped and helped and helped. I mean, I think he knew I did right by him, and when I needed him, he was there.
Tell us about like meeting Barry Windsor-Smith, and then some of the initial projects you did together, and then what his career at Valiant looked like about your working relationship with Barry, but also when you met him.
I can't remember exactly the first time I met him. I'd known him for years. I mean, he lived up in Woodstock. Before that, somewhere else in that area. Starlin and Wrightson lived up there, and I used to go up to visit those guys once in a while. Starlin had this nice place like in the mountains, and we'd do stuff like he had an ATV and I had a motorcycle. We'd go out on the trails. There are all these logging trails in the mountains. In the winter, he had 2 snowmobiles, so and it wasn't just me. I mean, I go up there, groups of us go up there, because he liked that. There's not a whole lot to do in Phoenicia, New York, so he liked having people come and play for a weekend. So we went tubing on the mighty Esopus River. We went, like I said, in the winter, snowmobiles. In the summer, on the trail bike. Just generally went up and had a good time, and found decent restaurants here and there, and so I'd hang out with him. Bernie was usually there, and Starlin, and who else? Sometimes, I once Mary Jo Duffy came up with us. It was like 4 or 5 of us. Christy Shield. I don't know. There was a little crew of guys. We'd get a car, we'd go up and spend a couple days. So fine. Up in that area was also Bernie Wright. Was Barry Windsor-Smith. So one time we got together with him, and one time I went to his house. This was before he moved to Woodstock, and it was all full of. I mean, you almost couldn't get through the halls because they were stacked with boxes of posters that he couldn't sell.
His Gore Blimey press posters, right?
Yeah, Gore Blimey press. We had a house full of Gore Blimey press. So I got to know him a little bit, and he had worked for me. He did work for me at Marvel. I'm not exactly sure how that came about. It wasn't like me calling him or something. It was like Chris called him or something. I don't know. But at any rate, he did some work for Marvel. He did some of that X-Men stuff, the Weapon X, and he did Machine Man and stuff under my watch. So he'd come in the office a lot, and I'd see him, and we got along fine. Took him out to dinner a few times. His girlfriend Linda, at the time, she would come. So, and Leighton used to live up there too. So Leighton knew him as well, and he would often come, not up to Starlin's house, but to out on dinners or something. So we get to know each other a little bit. So, all right, fine. I leave Marvel. I need a gig. We ended up starting Valiant, and needed an artist. And everybody was busy or too expensive, or for some reason didn't like me or whatever. But Barry had burned his bridges at both Marvel and DC. He got in a big fight with Marvel, and they didn't want him. And he also, when he went to DC, got in a big fight with them, and they didn't want him. And there was kind of no other major player to go to. And even though we were small and starting up, I was running it like we're going to be a major. And so we called him, and he needed a gig. And we could sure use a good artist, especially somebody who had a name. And so he came and decided he could work for us. He's a very fussy guy. I had to audition for him. I'm writing everything. He says, I don't want this to be like Marvel. He said, Claremont would give me these stories, and they were dumb, and I had to fix them. He says, I don't want to be fixing things. I just want to draw, He says, so if you show me a story and I like it, then I'll consider it, doing this for a while, Barry. You know? So I wrote him a story, and he said, "Well, this is good." I said, "Yeah, I know." And he said, "Well, I can do this." I said, "Good." And so after that, one other time on EXO, he wanted me to write the story first, and then he would decide, you know, if I was good enough. So I wrote the story, and then he decided he could, you know, it was all right. He could do it. So, and then he bitched because he had to do research on spiders. But at any rate, you know, I was a little obstreperous, little kind of an ego, you know, and demanding in different ways. But he needed us too. We needed him. He needed us. So I was able to work with him. He wanted to do all kinds of crazy overlapping, interlocking panels. I said, no. We do the grid, just like Kirby. Okay, stay in the grid. Don't overlap anything. You do a bleed only when I say so. And but that's stupid. And I don't care. That's what we're doing. You don't want to do that? Let it go. And he's so okay, but he did it, and look what he did. It was great.
Yeah, I love that stuff.
Just brilliant, because he is a fantastic storyteller, and he's got it stylized. Who cares? It looks great, and so he did good work for us, and a little cranky sometimes, but mostly fine, and got along pretty well.
So then, do you happen to recall what were those arguments he had at DC and Marvel?
I don't know specifically what the DC one was. Marvel, like I said, he was very fussy. Only wanted certain. He managed to offend some people there to the point where nobody wanted him. And I can't give you chapter and verse on this stuff, but if you don't want Barry Windsor-Smith, he must have done something. I'll give you an example. Mike Richardson, Barry's biggest fan, but he had a lot of trouble working with him, and he's kind of not interested anymore in working with Barry because it's hard to work with.
Yeah.
You know, if he had other options, it probably wouldn't have worked out at all at Valiant. But like I said, we needed each other.
I see. And yeah, because I know that he took issue with like printing process, and if it didn't come out, the color didn't come out quite right, or the ink didn't come out quite right, that would really like drive him nuts. Maybe it was about stuff like that.
It could have been, especially at Marvel, since the guy who did the production there was not good. But we had JJ Jackson, and she's great. And since Barry was so fussy about the coloring, since JJ is a great colorist, I had her color most of his stuff. I think all of it. But anyway, he would come in and he would lecture. Well, no, why would this floor be green? No one would do that. And she's like, I look good. So, but I mean, you had. But the nice thing about JJ is she has such respect for him as an artist. He could like yell at her, and she's, didn't bat an eye. She took it as constructive criticism, no matter how loud he said it. And she did great work for him. And many times he complimented her, by the way, and because she is great. But I mean, like, it's kind of like walking a minefield with him sometimes. It's a little tricky.
Tricky. There you go. That's a good word. So now, why did you pencil under the name Paul Creddick? Is that the name?
Well, yeah, Paul Creddick.
Why did you use that name sometimes?
Well, that's my brother-in-law's first name and middle name, Paul Creddick. His last name is Smith. The reason I used a pseudonym was because I didn't want people to know that Valiant was too broke to afford an artist.
I see.
And I didn't want people to think it was me. Like, how desperate are they that they're using him? So I used a pseudonym to kind of cover up the fact that we couldn't get people, or we didn't have the money. And sometimes it was like late, you couldn't get anybody, or there's nobody you could get in time. And I was like the artist of last resort. No one would pick me first, including me. But I did it what I had to. And one thing I'll say for Leighton is that, if I did the roughs and he inked it, it ended up looking pretty good. A little bit. Some jobs he would just do the big heads and big, larger figures. And maybe he'd do the splash page. and then they have the assistants, the background guys do the rest. But I mean, so if I had Jim Mooney inked the job, it wasn't Marvel. I mean, we couldn't get anybody. You can believe Marvel couldn't get an artist. Everybody was busy. Everybody was on something, or couldn't find them, whatever. And so I ended up laying out an issue. I did it a couple times. One time, Jim Mooney inked, it looked pretty good, because he's Jim Mooney, and maybe a couple others, I guess. I don't remember, but it was only because there was no choice. I just had to do it, and that's it was really a shame because when money was rolling in over the gunwales and we could actually afford guys, it's about the time I left.
So then when you did leave, you had mentioned that Barry then assumed some sort of corporate position there and then left shortly after. What happened with that?
All right, so they fired me, and now they thought, well, we'll bring in a big name as like a figurehead. Doesn't have to do anything. We'll just, we want a big name. Who do we got? Barry. So they asked Barry to be the president of the company, and they made him an offer. They offered him $4 million, to basically do that, and then of course a salary as the president. They offered Leighton $4 million to stay and run the operation of the bullpen, which he more or less was doing anyway. And they wanted to pay John Hartz $3 million. All of these is like to pay them off to stab me in the back. And they took it. Hartz took it. Leighton took it. Barry kept negotiating. After a while, they didn't need him anymore. And so they just stiffed him. So anyway, I didn't talk to Hartz later, but a friend of mine, Chuck Rosansky, talked to him. He said, John, how can you do that? And John says, Jim's going to have plenty of shots at the brass ring. He said, this is my only one. All right. And Leighton is just, as far as I'm concerned, just scum. So
I see. So then, so Leighton got the $4 million, but Barry Windsor-Smith did not get the $4 million.
He did not. He kept negotiating, wanted a nickel more here and a nickel more there. And finally they realized, hey, we're doing pretty good. We don't need this guy.
Right. Interesting. So that was a short thing with him. Yeah.
And the reason I know that is because Barry called me and I wasn't there, but I had one of those answering machines that as long as you keep talking, it keeps recording. This is back in the ancient answering machine days.
Yeah.
And so he just talked into my answering machine. I still have the tape someplace, I guess, about how he should have not listened to them. They told him a pack of lies and what an evil guy I was and stuff. And he should have not listened to them. He should have asked me. We should have talked. And it turned out that they screwed him. And, that's sad. I mean, one guy that did talk to me is immediately they right away they get David Lapham in a room. They're trying to force him to sign a contract. They're all ready. And he said he had to think about it. So what's he do? He calls me. He says, what's going on? So I told him what's going on. And he said, well, I need this job. He said, but the minute you start something else. So right after this happened, phone rings. It's Frank Miller. I said, hey, Frank, how you doing? He said, okay, I heard the lies. Tell me what really happened. And I did. And he said, son of a bitch, that just sucks. And I said, yeah, well, what am I going to do? Start again, So Frank then, pretty soon after I left, they got rid of Ditko. Cut loose a founding father, you fool? No. But they fired him. They just said, no more work for you, Steve. See ya. And he needed work, And so I called Frank. And I said, Frank, I haven't spoken to Mike Richardson for a long time, and I'm not even sure he'd take my call, or he wouldn't get to it right away or something. I said, but I know he'll take your call. I said, Steve Ditko needs help. And I said, maybe you can work out something, with Mike that the Dark Horse could use in some way. And so Frank says, okay, I'm on it. So he called Richardson, and Richardson did make Steve an offer. I think Steve did some stuff with him, but and then that tided him over until he found other stuff. He came to work for me at Defiant for a while.
Wow. So did Leighton fire Ditko?
Well, I guess he was more or less running the joint, so I would say yes. The one good thing I'll say for Bob is that he just couldn't pull the trigger on Pearl. He convinced, he said, Don, if you stay here and do the job. And so, don't have anything to do with that shooter guy, So Don did stay, but he did have to do it with me. We were always sort of secretly sneaking off to lunch and stuff. And he kept saying, like, listen, when you start something, he says, I have to have this job, but when you start something, call me. So, okay, a couple of years passed, and Don was making real good money. He was doing Bloodshot and stuff, and he was doing really well. And I called him up, and he said, I just can't, I can't do it. I need this money. And I said, God bless you. He thought I hated him. And then when we started Broadway, we had a launch party, and I invited Don, and he came, and we hadn't seen each other for a while, but we picked it up just like we always do.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah, Don's been around he's kind of like this silent guy in comics, but he's been around since even like Golden Age years.
Yeah, he worked for one of his first jobs was working for Eisner, and Eisner fired him. But he worked a lot of places, and he was always a good guy. He was never the star.
Right.
Great storyteller, and he could draw anything you asked him to do.
Yeah.
If I ask some of these young artists to draw me like a slightly, let's say, chubby person or something, they can't. They draw one body, and that's it. They put different hair on it to make it different people. Don, you explain it to him, he nails it every time.
Yeah.
And he got it. He was very creative too. He created Slagger, that's his, and he was helped create Rye. He was just, he was always coming up with ideas and stuff, and really cared. And that's my kind of guy. Yeah.
So now you had some like a brief involvement with Valiant again in 2007.
Yeah.
What exactly happened there? And was there some like lawsuit that occurred around that time?
Yeah. What happened was these guys, Dinesh and Jason Katari, Dinesh Shamdasani, something like that, and Jason Katari, they were two young men, and I guess they came from wealthy families. I don't know. But somehow they put together a couple $1 million, and they bought the Valiant characters, the ones I created, out of bankruptcy, out of Acclaim Entertainment's bankruptcy, because Acclaim bought Valiant, and they went bankrupt. Dinesh and Jason bought the characters. And at first they didn't know what they were going to do with them. Dinesh had some involvement in the Fillmore, but I think he did financial work or something. But so he was trying to do stuff out there. They called me up, and the first thing they asked me to do is, would I write a screenplay for one of the characters I created? I said, I'd consider it. So we talked about it, and we didn't really get down to money or stuff. They said, all right, well, if you're interested, we'll call you. Well, they didn't, but after a while, they did call me, and they said, well, we're thinking of publishing, and we'd like you to be the editor-in-chief. And they made me an offer, and it sucked. And I said, well, no, thank you, And they called me again. Each time they called me, the number went up. And then finally, it was a pretty good number. And I said, I can use a gig, So I went and I took the job. It was just I made it clear to them, I don't want to be the machine that makes the product anymore. I want to be the editor-in-chief and conduct the orchestra. And they said, fine. I said, no writing. And they said, fine. So we didn't have a contract. We didn't even have a deal memo. Nothing. They just hired me, and the understanding we had was I wasn't going to write. First day I come in there, they asked me to write something. It was a pitch for some Hollywood thing. And every day I was writing. I wrote comics. I wrote pitches. They had this guy, I can't remember his name, Spanish last name, don't know, Gomez, maybe. He was. They had hired this guy and paid him a whole big bunch of money to try to fix some of the properties after I left were really stupid, and so they asked him to fix them, and he, battered it out over a weekend. It was stupid, it made no sense, and they paid him a lot of money for it. So they said, we're not happy with this, and I said, good, show some judgment. They said, can you fix these characters? And I said, yeah, I can fix them. So I did. I went through one at a time. First, I did Quantum and Woody, which was done by Christopher Priest, who used to be Jim House. And the stuff there was really pretty good. It was really good, except that he was doing that blackout sketch comedy trick where you get little snippets and it's not all in chronological order, nice little scenes, and they weren't exactly chronological. So that was fine, and they were pretty funny. They were good. A couple things went wrong. One thing is that after he had the origin issue, then he kind of forgot they were superheroes, and for like 6 or 7 issues, they didn't do anything super. And then finally somebody pointed out to him, they got these bands, they're supposed to be powerful. So then he started doing a little bit of superhero stuff, but they're like climbing up buildings on a rope like Batman and stuff, what they were doing like Batman stuff before that. Okay, then he starts doing that. Then he's doing the sketch comedy, blackout sketch comedy thing. And it's really hard doing that because what happens is it's easy to lose track. Just to give you one example, Woody was supposedly growing up wealthy in Connecticut, and, going to private schools and stuff like that. And they show him, Mark Bright drew him, in like a prep school jacket. He looked like a middle to late teenage guy, right? He's wearing a prep school jacket, all right? The crest and everything. Okay. So then Jim forgets that, or Christopher forgets that. And the thing is that his mother loses the money, the support. They have to move. They end up moving to Harlem. All right. Okay. Funny, when he leaves Connecticut, he's in prep school. And when he arrives in Harlem, he's 5 years old. So that was just one thing. There's a lot of little logical problems here and there that would crop up, not because he's a bad writer, but because he was doing a very high degree of difficulty dive. And probably doing it on the fly. Probably did it 10 times as well as anyone else could have. But, there was glitches. Also, Bloodshot made no sense. Ninjak was like a really bad, lame, kung fu movie origin. Just a lot of stuff. So I fixed them one at a time, made it make sense. Somebody told me that they used some of my Ninjak stuff. Like, why Ninjak? Okay. What? And his name's Jack, and he's a ninja. Ninjak. That's stupid. Sorry. So what I did was I had him, when he was doing his training, his master tells him there are 10 ranks of ninja, which is true. Some say 15. They're wrong. 10 ranks of ninja, and he becomes so good that he says, the master says, you're 11th rank. Okay. So since there's no 11th rank, the 11th letter of the alphabet is K. Okay. So he signs a note sometime that's for some secret agent guy or something, and he signs it Ninja K, right? The guy reads it as Ninjak, and then it becomes his personal in-joke that oh yeah, I'm Ninja K, So I did that. They told me they used that. I guess, I don't know. I haven't read any of this stuff. But I did a remake of all the characters, including a couple of mine. I improved Exo's origin. I did a lot of stuff. I did Eternal Warrior, and I wrote some scripts and stuff. And I didn't want to be writing. I was like, why am I doing this every day? And I'm sitting in a room, not a big room, with like 4 to 5 other people, all talking, and I'm trying to write. That's hard. And so finally, I got sick of it, and so I quit. Left the computer and my keys on the desk, and left a note, resignation letter. I called Mike Richardson. I said, should have probably done this first, but I need a gig. And he said, well, funny you should call, because I just got the rights to publish news stories for Solar, Magnus, Turok, Samson, everything. He said, can you do it again? I said, yeah, I can do it again. He said, it can't be like you did before. He said, it has to be all different. He said, I want it to look like it's in part 2 of Valiant. He said, so you have to do all different. You have to be true to the source material, but you have to be different. He said, can you handle it? I said, yeah, I think I can. So I ended up working for them for a couple of years. I did Solar, Magnus, Samson, and Turok. It was good. It was fun.
Interesting. So now,
yes, the lawsuit.
Yes.
So, okay. So I leave them. I call Mike, And Mike says, well, I want to do this. He says, I'm going to fly you to San Diego, put you up in a hotel, and I want you to be the surprise announcement I make on stage when I do my little thing. I said, great, okay. So I did that. And he calls me up on stage and he announces. This is about 2-3 weeks after I left Valiant. Okay, Valiant had, in the meantime, hired Fred Pierce. And Fred Pierce used to be like Israeli Secret Service, and one time at Valiant, somebody was counterfeiting our books, and he organized a sting with the state police and everything, and they caught the guy. So he was into all that, that kind of stuff. I'm pretty sure he was behind this. I haven't asked him, but I'm pretty sure. They sued me. Valiant sued me, alleging that I had not only that I violated my contract. I didn't have a contract. There wasn't even a deal memo. There wasn't a single shred of paper, right? They said I was betraying their trade secrets. I'd like to know what those were, because these guys didn't know anything about publishing. And they said I was and that I'd gone off to work for Mike, and that was there was something wrong with that. I think it was another violation of the contract that didn't exist. But you can sue anybody for anything, right? So it cost me about $11,000 to get rid of that. But the way it really was gotten rid of was that I'm thinking, if you think Mike stole me away, why aren't you suing Dark Horse? Okay, and Mike didn't care if they sued him because he has lawsuit insurance. But they didn't sue Dark Horse. Instead, Fred Pierce is talking to Mike about, hey, we'll stop suing Jim if you do a movie deal with us. So Mike has breakfast with me. He was in New York, and we had breakfast, and he says, this is what they're doing. And I said, they're trying to manipulate you. He says, I don't like being manipulated. I said, well, good for you. So he said, go to hell. And then there was no point in suing me anymore. It cost me $11,000, but they withdrew the suit, but not with prejudice. I mean, they could always reinstate it. So they'll probably do it for me saying this. I don't care. They also stiffed me on my vacation pay. They owed me about $4,000, and they stiffed me on that too. So they owe me about $15,000. I'll never get it. Doesn't matter. But they were just, I think it was Fred's behind it, because like I said, they even tried to pull a sting on me after I left Valiant. They set up this phony guy who was trying to trick me into betraying trade secrets and asking me he was pretending he was going to fund a new comic book company. Who can you steal from Valiant? Because if I say, I think Perlin will come, they can sue me because at that time I still own stock, so I'm violating my fiduciary responsibility. So I said, I'd never do that. No, that would be a violation of my fiduciary responsibility because I saw through the guy. And then he gets all frustrated and leaves. So, and I'm pretty sure that's Fred, because he's really smart about stuff like that. He's really clever, and like I said, he was Israeli Secret Service. He really knows all that skullduggery.
So then, I guess final question is just looking back. One of the things when I was interviewing Gary Groth, he used the word muckraker a bit. Looking back, would you look at him and the Comics Journal while you were, kind of in the prime of your comic days, and he was printing things and interviewing you also? How did you look at him? Was it like as a journalist, as a nemesis, as like just this is irritating? Like what was?
He was certainly no journalist, and he had a guy work with him, Kim Thompson, I think. They weren't journalists. I mean, basically, early on when I was editor-in-chief, the first time they interviewed me, at that time, that was the nadir of Kirby's career. I mean, he was just, everybody thought he was a joke. He was old-fashioned, and his stuff was dumb, and they didn't like him anymore. And that interview consisted of them trying to get me to say bad things about Kirby. About how terrible the book sold, and what a brain-dead old guy he was and stuff. And I wasn't going to do that, I thought, well, that's pretty evil. You guys, the first few issues of Comics Journal seemed pretty nice. It seemed like you're interested in the comics. And now you're like looking for controversy because you think you can sell more. So then two things happened. I mean, they found out that they could sell magazines by attacking me. Okay? And also Marvel was taking off. So we're easy to attack with big target. I mean, it's like, you can't pick on the little guy, but when we're succeeding, it's a good time to attack. The other thing is that they realized that by championing Kirby, they'd sell more books. Make Marvel the bad guy, or on Kirby's side. And so to me, it was just venal and corrupt. And I thought, wait a minute, you guys were attacking Kirby every issue and trying to get me to say bad things about him. And now that you think you can sell more magazines by being on his side, now you're all on his side. What is it? Where does the hypocrisy end? The other thing is with those guys. Sal Buscema says that I asked him, Sal, why don't you come to conventions and help promote the stuff? He said, I'll never do a comic book convention again. He said, I did one, that's the last one. And I said, why? And he said, this kid in the neighborhood in Virginia, he said, ripped me off. It was, they took a drawing of mine, they made photocopies or printed copies of it, and they were selling them. And, he said, they wanted me to do all these workshops and stuff. And he said, I was doing it to help the neighbor kid. And I find out that they're making all this money on it. And, at the end of the show, he's like, oh, we can do this every month. He said, no, I'm never doing this again. Okay. Who was the kid? Gary Groth. Okay. So, I mean, I don't know. Maybe there's more than one Gary Groth in the world. But, I just think he was a kind of a shyster the whole time. Anyway, I don't think there's no journalism that goes on there. Their letter column is called Blood and Thunder. What they do is they try to get two people to fight. They'll piss off one guy, and they do an interview with what's his name? Worked at DC. Did E-Man, I think, for First Comics.
Oh, Staten and
Joe Staten,
yeah.
And so they did an interview with him, and they kind of goaded him into saying horrible things about Barry Windsor-Smith, for instance, and other people. And then of course they have war going on in their letter column. And a lot of people buy just to see Barry's reply and then Staten's reply to the reply, and or whoever else they try to get people pissed off and ranting, and they were successful because a lot of comic book guys are kind of naive about that. They don't realize, these guys are tricking you so they can sell magazines. This is not about comics. It's not even about you. So I don't know. Don't think much of them. They published some good stuff. They published the Hernandez brothers.
Right, that was good. Yeah,
a lot of really nice things.
I like their interviews with like Bill Gaines. They had a good interview with him, or one with Harvey Kurtzman. A lot of those old guys before they passed on. So it's nice to have that.
Yeah, I met Harvey at a party at Will Eisner's house. Had a long talk with him. He was great. I got to know Bill Gaines a little bit. Run into him all the time. He always said the same thing. Every time he'd see me, he's a huge guy. He's almost as tall as me, very big, very heavy. And Jim, how you doing? You know what my ambition in life is? What? I want to weigh less than my refrigerator. I said, get a new joke. He said, why? You're still up. He said, I'm not going to, until it's worn out, I'm going to do it. He was very nice. He was very good.
That's pretty awesome. Well, I really appreciate you talking with me. It means a lot to me on a personal level, and also just to get your story out there. You have a lot of stories. I mean, you've talked to a lot of people. You've managed a lot of things. So it's almost like my attempt to try to get that story out there in this way that if this is a companion interview, but it's all one big picture of Jim Shooter, and I know that it's impossible to get it all out, but I really appreciate you humoring me, and also hanging out and chatting with me, and discussing your history as well as just history of comics in general. Thanks so much.
Thank you.